Hey guys, welcome to Green Bean Fiction. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if abandoned Deku became overpowered? Movie. This story is Bendita Ignorancia by Kimsasa094. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button, as your one like motivates me to bring more stories, and subscribe the channel if you are new so you won't miss our latest videos. Third person POV. Quirkless people are those born without any quirks. They have no unique traits or anything that places them in the category of superhumans like the rest of the world. Instead, they become normal humans in an abnormal world. These people constitute a minority of the world, representing approximately 20% of the global population without quirks. In some countries, like the United States, the percentage of quirkless people is higher, but in Japan, the percentage is lower. It's estimated that only 5% of the Japanese population is quirkless. Therefore, countries like Japan treat their quirkless people much worse than quirkless people are treated in countries like the United States, which has a quirkless rate of 15%. In the case of Izuku Midoriya in Japan, he is treated like a lab rat, an object of ridicule and prejudice. Japanese society views quirkless people as weak and worthless, or as a burden on society. Ironically, many of the best scientists who create support equipment or new advances in medicine and other fields are quirkless. However, they all work in countries that have laws to protect them from discrimination and hate crimes, unlike Japan, where the laws ignore the existence of the quirkless population. The laws are designed to be impartial, to judge everyone fairly, regardless of who commits which crime. However, when a person becomes quirkless, the blindfold is removed, and justice is nowhere to be found. Only hatred remains. It's not uncommon for people to pity an eccentric individual, nor is it uncommon for someone to hate and mistreat them. Not everyone is like this, and there are many decent people who try to help those without quirks, but Japanese society turns a blind eye to those without quirks. Therefore, little has changed. However, sometimes a person without a quirk has very bad luck. They encounter people who blindly hate those without quirks and see it as a kind of disease that must be eliminated, and some of those people have made many attempts to do so against those without quirks when they find them. With this knowledge in hand, let's explore the life of one Izuku Midoriya. The boy was born to Inko Midoriya and Hisashi Midoriya, both with unusual abilities, but she gave birth to a child without any. The father looked at the boy with hatred, while the mother continued to look at him with love. When the boy turned 4 and went to the doctor, the father went on a trip abroad, or so the mother said, but Izuku knew that his father had left because of him. He was awake when he heard his parents arguing. Because of this, he knew that he was the reason he was pushing his mother's love away. Time passed slowly, and his former best friend, Katsuki Bakugo, also turned against him. The person he saw as a brother had abandoned him when he was 5 years old. They drifted further and further apart after Izuku was declared quirkless, and Izuku could no longer be a hero in Bakugo's eyes. However, Izuku still held on to the hope that his brother would return someday. As Izuku grew older, the other children became crueler, at the suggestion of their teachers. The teachers encouraged the children to hurt him. They turned a blind eye when the other children threw his toys and stones at him. They turned a blind eye when the other children destroyed his belongings. They turned a blind eye to the degrading terms they used against Izuku: useless, worthless, sick, and many more. Then, one day, Bakugo came up with the name Deku. It was another way of saying Izuku's name, according to Bakugo. Thus, Izuku was now the shortened version of Dekunobo, which means, good for nothing. In Bakugo's words, it meant someone who can't do anything. It only took a few days for the name to spread like wildfire. Even the teachers started using it to refer to Izuku Midoriya. They called him Deku Midoriya instead of Izuku Midoriya. Only when someone from outside the school or Izuku's mother was present did the teachers call him by his real name. They knew what they were doing from the beginning. They wanted to strip him of his humanity. This happened when Izuku was 6 years old. They dehumanized a 6-year-old boy because he was eccentric. Years passed quickly, and Izuku learned to survive. He didn't emerge unscathed, though, with both mental and physical wounds. All of them left deep scars. By the time Izuku reached the age of 10, the verbal and mild physical bullying had escalated into abuse and near torture. However, in the eyes of the law, nothing illegal was being done, as no police officer or adult would listen to Izuku. And so, Izuku learned to survive. Rule 1. Keep your mouth silent whenever possible. Rule 2. Do not get better grades or perform better than the top students in the class with oddities. Rule 3. Do not resist or complain when they decide you need to be punished. Rule 4. Don't go to the police because you should be thankful for being alive. Rule 5. Do not beg them to stop, as only humans have rights because you are not human. He learned these rules through painful lessons. Even Rule 4 he learned one day, at age 11, when he tried to ask a police officer for help after an attack by his peculiar classmates. Izuku was bleeding heavily, but the moment the officer realized Izuku was eccentric, he stood up and started walking away. He turned around and said, "Don't bother the police with your petty problems. You should be lucky if they don't shoot you now and say you attacked me, you useless idiot." The officer said. The pain in Izuku's heart that day was immense. In that moment, he knew he was alone and couldn't receive help because he wasn't human in their eyes. He didn't deserve rights. Izuku persevered through the remaining years and continued to survive, despite all the scars now covering his body. However, he didn't want his mother to worry. She was the only person who still looked at him with love and cared for him. Izuku had become very good at discerning whether someone truly cared for him or not just by looking into their eyes. People say the eyes are the window to the soul, and for Izuku, it was true. He could usually tell how someone felt from their words just by looking into their eyes. That's how he survived for so long and learned not to trust too many people when he was younger. Therefore, Izuku became streetwise and resourceful when he needed to acquire medicine or other products to conceal his injuries. He knew the look that greeted him when someone honked at him and didn't overcharge him at stores. These stores became his go-to spots for obtaining supplies to cover his scars or treat his wounds. He knew that if he entered a store where someone glared at him, they would overcharge him or simply kick him out. Over the years, Izuku's body, if you looked at him, looked like a skinny stick of noodles, but in reality, he had muscles beneath his clothes. He knew he had to train if he wanted to be a hero without quirks, as he aspired to be. However, the main reason was survival. He needed muscles to escape his tormentors and abusers. He needed muscles to fight off anyone who attacked him on the street. Therefore, he became skilled in several martial arts and could either hold his own in a fight and win most of the time, or quickly flee from a fight he couldn't win. It was the rule of the jungle for Izuku. However, he made sure to conceal his strength and appear weak. Even though he was strong, he was still defenseless against the laws of society and would be mercilessly taken down if those who hated him discovered he was gaining strength to fight. Always remember rule number 1. Keep your mouth shut whenever possible, Izuku thought when people asked him for personal details. Knowledge is power, and Izuku wasn't about to lose a mind game when he was allowed to show his. However, this wasn't the time to reveal his mind. Rule 2. Don't get higher grades or do better than those at the top of the class with quirks. Never break this rule, no matter what, because if you do, you'll be punished. Remember this rule well, because that day he was restrained by several of his classmates after Bakugo and the others left. They waited for Izuku to try to escape and then threw him to the ground. They had enough people to hold each of his arms and legs, and one person to hold his body. They lifted his sleeve high enough and pulled out a knife. Izuku thought he would die that day, but no. They just wanted him to never forget what he was. They restrained him and gagged him so he couldn't call for help. But what help was coming? As the boys slowly cut into his skin, letter by letter, cut by cut, they carved the word into his skin. Finally, they finished and let Izuku stand as they left. Izuku sat there in pain and bleeding. He knew he had to clean it all up, since the teacher would blame him for anything if the blood was found. So Izuku wrapped the bandages he was carrying around the wound, then went to the closet and started cleaning up all the blood on the floor. It took him about 30 minutes to finish and go home. He needed to clean the wound or it would get infected and possibly kill him. As he entered his house, his mother called him. "Izuku. You're late. Is everything all right?" his mother asked. Izuku felt guilty for making her worry. He called again and told her everything was fine and that he would be in his room. After entering his room, he closed the door and took out his first aid kit. He cleaned the wound and could now see what was etched into his skin. Quirkless Freak was carved deep enough that Izuku knew immediately, based on his other scars, that it wasn't going away. They had cut deep enough to leave it on his body forever. Another reminder of Izuku's painful existence. As time passed, he acquired more wounds and scars, but none on the scale of that last scar etched into his skin. He grew smarter and stronger, but he kept it hidden. Staying low and hidden, so he was less likely to be seen as a threat and killed, was what crossed his mind. Izuku continued doing this until one day his life changed. Izuku committed suicide at the end of school. He was told to kill himself an average of 3 times every 2 weeks or so, but this time was different. It was Bakugo's, his former best friend, whom he still called Kachan because he wanted his former brother back. He wanted his brother back so badly, yet Bakugo chose to join the suicide trap. Not once before that day had he committed suicide with him, and all that Bakugo did with his worlds and his physical violence, with or without his quirk, compared to everything the others did. Of course, it still hurt, and perhaps worse since it was him, but the number of times he did it was far less than other people in the class, the teachers, or others in his town. If you're so desperate for a quirk, pray you're born with one in your next life and do a swan jump off the roof. Bakugo told Izuku about the other times he'd heard similar words. Since Izuku refused to acknowledge the words, he moved on. The day only got worse, as he was attacked by a sludge villain. This villain tried to kill him before the number 1 hero, All Might, arrived to save him. As Izuku recovered his thoughts, he knew he'd finished asking the question. Surely, the symbol of peace, who tells everyone they can be a hero, would tell him he could be one even without surgery. Oh, how wrong Izuku was. While Izuku was on the rooftop with All Might, before he could finish speaking, All Might cut him off, his true form revealed. All Might spoke before Izuku could complete his sentence, explaining the training and mental preparation he had undergone, the life he had lived and survived. All Might's words were a huge blow to him. No, I don't think a person without a personality can be a hero. It's too dangerous, and I should be more realistic. I can't honestly tell you yes. It's okay to dream, but be realistic about it and consider being a police officer or a doctor or something like that. They're still heroes in their own right. All Might affirmed as he turned around and walked away in his scrawny form. All Might didn't understand. He didn't want to be a hero for trivial reasons. He wanted to become a light for all those whom society hated and mistreated. He wanted to make a difference for them. As a police officer or a doctor, he wouldn't have that power. Soon, an explosion occurred in the distance, and before Izuku knew it, his body carried him there. It was there that his destiny would begin to change. Bakugo was being murdered by the sludge villain from before, and Izuku thought it was his fault the villain had escaped. Soon, his body was moving on its own, and he gouged out the villain's eyes with some rocks. He grabbed Bakugo and pulled him out of there, complaining that the Deku Dam was trying to kill himself. The heroes around him were yelling at him to come back, but they did nothing. Just as the villain was about to attack again, Izuku saw All Might jump in and save the day. The heroes simply yelled at Izuku for getting in the way, though they did nothing. Izuku managed to escape them quickly and found himself walking toward his house. Bakugo approached him and yelled that he didn't need help. Izuku couldn't think straight, unsure of what to do with his life. Dark thoughts were gnawing at his mind when All Might appeared. It was at that moment that Izuku learned about One for All and how eccentric All Might used to be. All Might apologized for his words and admitted he had projected himself onto Izuku. Izuku could see in his eyes that he was being sincere. Izuku thought about it for a few moments and agreed to take on One for All. Izuku wanted to be a hero without quirks, but he knew he could save more people and have more influence if he had One for All to support him in his dreams. If I manage to reach number 1, people will have to listen to what I say when I demand reforms. Izuku's goal was to save people, but it was more about saving those with weaker quirks, those without quirks, or those with quirks deemed villainous by society. He knew the pain these people endured. He knew that these people were much more likely to become criminals because of the way society treated them from a young age. He wanted to change things, and he would do so at a faster pace with One for All coursing through his veins. Therefore, Izuku began his 10 months of grueling training with All Might. Because Izuku was far smarter and stronger than he led on to All Might or anyone else, he finished the training in 8 months instead of 10, much to All Might's delight. Thus, Izuku received 1 for all and trained for 2 whole months before entering UA. Training his quirk was difficult, but Izuku quickly grasped the challenges thanks to his hidden intelligence. During the first month, Izuku struggled to control his energy output and was using 1 quirk for everything. Instead of focusing it solely on his arm, he needed to channel it throughout his entire body. By the beginning of the 10th month, Izuku had figured out how to use his full hood mode. He was even able to wield 20% of his quirk for all purposes. However, Izuku was still bound by his past and his ingrained habits. Rule 1. Keep your mouth silent whenever possible. Rule 2. Do not get better grades or perform better than the top students in the class with oddities. Rule 3. Do not resist or complain when they decide you need to be punished. Rule 4. Don't go to the police because you should be thankful you're alive. Rule 5. Do not beg them to stop, as only humans have rights because you are not human. Being better than others wasn't acceptable for those without quirks. Even if he had a quirk, the rules wouldn't disappear so easily. Therefore, Izuku only admitted to being able to use 5% of 1 for all in his full hood mode. It wasn't that he didn't trust All Might, but the words All Might had said on the rooftop still stung, even though he'd meant to protect Izuku. Izuku also realized that All Might knew nothing about being quirkless these days, since he'd suggested it was a career in the police force or medicine. Chiropterans couldn't enter those fields due to the rules prohibiting them from attending medical school or the police academy. Therefore, Izuku didn't open up about his past to All Might for fear of being rejected, since he'd spent so much time in the operating room that he'd forgotten his origins. Now it was time for the UA entrance exam, and Izuku was confident he would get enough points to pass, but without drawing attention to himself. However, plans don't always go as expected. Join us on our journey as we watch Izuku Midoriya grow from the hero known as Deku into the hero known as Apollo, who would bring about a change in Japanese society. The hero known as Apollo would be known for his knowledge and his desire to help people, but also for his capacity to become cruel and destructive when necessary. Third-person POV. Izuku was now a student at UA High School and enrolled in the hero course. He had passed the entrance exam, but had broken an arm and a leg when he surpassed the 20% threshold and reached 100% when he destroyed the zero-pointer robot. This caught the attention of his soon-to-be homeroom teacher, who realized he possessed far more strength than he displayed during the exam, in which he had earned a decent score to get into the hero course. Therefore, the first day of class was a bit awkward when Eraserhead, the homeroom teacher of Class 1A, confronted him about it. Izuku decided to tell some of the truth. "Sensei, I possess that amount of power, but my body currently cannot withstand it. I am only able to use 5% without breaking my body. The more muscle mass I gain, the more power I will be able to use. If I exceed my limit, it will make fighting or moving more difficult for me later on. Therefore, unless you order me to exceed my limit, I cannot, as I will break my bones," Izuku declared. He didn't like confronting his teacher. He could see the annoyance in his teacher's eyes. All teachers find him annoying, Izuku thought. Although in the end, Eraserhead believed the lie about the 5% limit and let him go. Bakugo tried to attack Izuku on the first day when he used his quirk. Although Eraserhead stopped him, which surprised Izuku. Although he didn't hold out hope for the future, and Izuku was right since Bakugo threatened him with small bursts of his quirk in the classroom and Eraserhead barely did anything to stop him. Bakugo also yelled at Izuku to shut up when he muttered, which was a habit he could never break and which cost him many scars in the past. As time passed, Izuku grew stronger, only revealing a fraction of his power. He soon told All Might he could use 10% of his strength after training with Gran Torneo, but in reality, he could use 25%. Izuku still didn't trust his teachers, even though they were accomplished heroes and he admired them. Even as heroes, they were still teachers. Although Izuku's walls were slowly crumbling, he tried to maintain them, as he always received conflicting messages from his classmates and teachers. Aizawa-sensei called him a troublemaker. It wasn't like Izuku wanted to get involved in a 200-year war that All Might never even mentioned in the first place. It wasn't like Izuku wanted Bakugo to blow up a building with his support team and try to kill him. It wasn't his fault Iida went after Stain in Hosu. It wasn't his fault Shigaraki attacked him at the mall. It wasn't his fault Kirishima and the others wanted to go save Bakugo either. It was only so they wouldn't get killed saving him. Izuku had long since given up hope of Bakugo ever being like a brother to him again, since he saw no signs of him getting any better. Therefore, Izuku felt he could trust his teachers to some extent, but not his personal problems. He could trust them to consider the interests of his classmates, but not his own, as he had learned from the past not to trust teachers. He trusted them as heroes, but not as teachers. In combat, but not in the classroom or during training. He knew he had to rely only on himself. He also kept his friends at a distance in reality without their knowledge. Although he hoped Shoto had a good understanding of some of Izuku's issues, he respected him enough not to interfere since Izuku didn't open up about them. However, everyone else only saw the smile on his face every day and never gave it a second thought. Even Bakugo didn't see the lies on his face. Although Izuku was a little more relaxed around Bakugo, he still kept his guard up. He and Bakugo had gotten into a fight because Bakugo had dragged him to the city's training grounds and demanded they spar. Bakugo wanted to know why Izuku and All Might were so close. He had some theories that Izuku refused to admit. The fight broke out, and All Might arrived and explained that he was losing his power despite his injury. All Might was about to explain one for all to Bakugo, but Izuku stopped him. If Izuku couldn't tell people like his mother or people he felt close to, like Shoto, who had grown very close to Izuku because of the secrets about Shoto's past, then Izuku wasn't going to let one of his thugs find out the truth about his quirk, not even from Izuku himself. Just as All Might was about to explain Izuku's quirk, he cut him off. All Might, I think we should leave now before Aizawa-sensei gets even angrier with us when he finds out about this. Izuku said, looking at All Might without Bakugo seeing his face. Izuku was looking at All Might with a look that said, don't tell him. All Might agreed and quickly shifted gears. Let's walk and talk. I'll explain how quirks like mine and young Midoriya's work in theory, since ours are similar. He affirmed. All Might then explained that his quirks were based on energy and allowed them to enhance their bodies. All Might also said that he himself was a late bloomer and had acquired his quirk a year before Izuku. Bakugo didn't seem convinced, but he had no way to insist, as the matter was closed by All Might. However, Bakugo gave Izuku a few looks that promised he wouldn't let him down anytime soon. Their relationship grew a little after that fight, as Bakugo had expressed many of his inner feelings, but Izuku still couldn't forget the past, even though Bakugo said it was in the past. It wasn't in the past for Izuku. The thoughts in his head weren't in the past, nor were the scars, they were in his present life. Izuku didn't want to fight because he knew he'd be blamed for it, but Bakugo left him no choice. As Izuku expected, he was blamed for part of the fight, even though it was self-defense. He hadn't even broken curfew when he went out. They still had time, but Bakugo wouldn't let him go out, forcing him to break it. Izuku's trust in his teacher waned a bit that day. Although he trusted him as a USJ hero and in other ways, he didn't trust him as a teacher, and he trusted him even less after that fight since he hadn't even taken the time to consider that Izuku had no other option but to fight. Time passed, and now it was time for the work-study period. Most of the class had passed the exam and obtained their provisional licenses. Izuku now held 35% control of OFA without anyone knowing. He only told them he had 15%. The rules were still deeply ingrained in Izuku, though his walls had weakened around his classmates since they hadn't treated him too badly. It's true they kept to themselves while Bakugo called him Deku and verbally bullied him. He did accept the name Deku as his hero name, but he felt he had no choice since everyone called him that. He tried to imagine it as the name Uraraka suggested, Dekiru, but Deku still meant useless, even though there was a similar name. They didn't call him Dekiru, they called him Deku. He gave in to his classmates' pressure because of Rule 3, do not resist or complain when they decide you must be punished. Izuku saw Deku as a punishment, even at Ua, and didn't fight it. He tried, but Uraraka had suggested a different meaning that left him no real way to reject it in Izuku's mind. Izuku began a work-study program with Sir Nighteye. Mirio had come and suggested he work at the agency since Sir wanted to meet him. At first, Izuku hated working there. Sir Nighteye didn't want to meet him. He wanted to dehumanize him, just like he did with everyone who knew about his quirkless past. Sir Nighteye didn't believe a quirkless boy like Izuku deserved to be one for all and that he wouldn't be a good replacement as the new All Might. Izuku just kept thinking that no one could be the All Might since no one could be the All Might but themselves. Izuku also found it ironic that Sir didn't seem to realize that All Might didn't have a quirk either. Izuku simply sat back, trying to rise to the challenge from Sir Nighteye. Izuku had gained some confidence since going to Ua thanks to some of his friends and was improving, but Sir Nighteye was relentless. Izuku hadn't obtained the seal and been approved, but Sir Nighteye kept him close to prove to him that he should relinquish OFA to Mirio. Thus began the overwhelming hostile work that Izuku had to do under Sir Nighteye's command. Izuku couldn't leave and find someone else, as that would be seen as admitting to Sir Nighteye that he wasn't worthy of OFA and Mirio was, and that wasn't something Izuku would allow. One thing Izuku knew with absolute certainty was that OFA wanted Izuku as its 9th user. Even the previous users had told Izuku this when he met them in a dream. They had the ability to look through his memories and saw everything. They all hugged him that night in the dream and told him that, no matter what happened, he should never pass on OFA until his death or retirement, when he found the 10th user. Izuku had done something he had never done before and had opened himself up to other adults. They saw his past and didn't reject him. They saw his willingness and determination to save people and accepted him. They saw him, and only him, as the wielder of the quirk and told him they would refuse the transfer if he ever attempted to transfer it when he wasn't dying or hadn't found a student of his own to train in the future. Therefore, Izuku refused to let Sir Nighteye win regarding his potential to be the 9th user. The previous users had boosted Izuku's confidence. It was still fragile, and he still didn't trust adults or teachers except on rare occasions, but his confidence was steadily growing. They didn't try to force Izuku to tell All Might because they knew how Izuku would react to his distrust of teachers and most adults. Although All Might was his mentor, he had made a huge mistake when they first met and hadn't even researched current information on quirklessness, which annoyed the 7th user. The days at the office were soon over when Izuku and Mirio were sent out on patrol. They were looking for any clues about the Shie Hassaikai and their leader, Overhaul. Izuku and Mirio were walking down the street when a little girl crossed their path. She was scared and frightened, but she felt warmth in Izuku's hands. She felt like she could relax with him for some reason. Izuku wanted to grab her and run when he saw Overhaul, but he couldn't. He saw the marks on the girl's body, marks of abuse and torture. However, Mirio wouldn't let her. Before the girl could walk back toward Overhaul, Izuku whispered that he would come for her soon and make sure she was free. She looked at him and saw the warmth in his eyes, then walked away. Izuku hated himself in that moment. They went back to see Sir Nighteye and told him what had happened. Izuku explained that he wanted to grab her and run because he was terrified, and Sir told him to stop being foolish and that being a hero required patience. Izuku could agree that a hero needed patience, but he also thought that being a hero meant acting when someone cried out for help, which the girl clearly needed. He remembered all the teachers and people who hadn't done anything for him and felt like he had failed them, promising that he would save her, even if it cost him his life. A few weeks passed, and the time for the assault on the base arrived. The meeting focused on how and when they would attack. They also discussed how the girl was being used as a source for the bullet destruction quirk. It was then that Izuku vowed to beat the crap out of Overhaul if he ever got the chance. After the meeting, Izuku went to talk to Gran Torino, who was also there. They chatted briefly about how Izuku was doing, and Izuku mentioned having a dream about the others, which surprised Gran Torino because Izuku had such a clear vision. Izuku felt more open with Gran Torino than with All Might, as Gran Torino didn't hold back in what he said or how he acted. However, that trust didn't extend beyond the stage where Izuku revealed everything. Izuku only mentioned a few details and ended the conversation upon seeing his teammates. He used that as a way to end the conversation and move on. Although, Izuku noticed Gran Torino go to talk to Sir Nighteye for a while. He wondered what they were talking about. After a few more days, Izuku and the others arrived at the raid site. What they didn't know was that the raid would turn into a very destructive fight and cause some damage. As they moved to begin the raid, a villain emerged from inside and threw some police officers into the air, causing Izuku and a few others to catch them. The raid had begun. As people split up and went to apprehend other villains, Izuku and Mirio fought their way through the tunnels. Izuku knew he might need to use more OFA on this mission, but he was able to conceal it quite well thanks to practice. As they progressed through the Riad, Izuku and Mirio soon encountered Overhaul, Chronostasis, and Eri. The fight dragged on as Mirio and Izuku battled to rescue Eri. After about 10 minutes, the situation shifted. When one of the members was defeated nearby, he pulled out a gun, and Overhaul fired a bullet at him, yelling for him to shoot. The member knew that Lemillion, aka Mirio, wouldn't take a hit and that Deku, aka Izuku, was too fast to strike without being stopped. Therefore, the member aimed at Eri herself, who was standing in the open. The member saw how much they wanted to save her and knew they would try to stop the bullet. So, he aimed and fired. Mirio had jumped in front of and over Eri to protect her. However, he didn't feel the impact. He turned around and saw an earthen wall blocking the path. Then he looked to his left and saw Izuku. As soon as Izuku saw the gun and Mirio moving to protect Eri, he increased his power and stamped his foot, causing a crack in the ground and sending debris flying. This caused the bullet to hit the debris instead of Mirio. Everyone fell silent until Izuku appeared in front of the member with the gun, knocked him out, and destroyed the weapon. Overhaul simply screamed as spikes flew everywhere, striking Mirio, who was protecting Eri. Mirio had thrown Eri back slightly off the spikes, but she still took a few blows before she could use her quirk. Because of this, Izuku yelled at him to grab Eri and leave since he was badly hurt. As Mirio started to leave with Eri, Overhaul shouted that he would kill everyone present if she didn't return with him. He kept repeating phrase after phrase until it finally broke her enough for her to break free from Mirio's grip and run back. Izuku knew why she did it: fear of her abuser and the rule against fighting back. At that moment, Sir Nighteye arrived and began fighting Overhaul in his new form. This form was a fusion of himself and one of his limbs. This battle lasted about 5 more minutes as each fought fiercely. Sir Nighteye used his foresight to see where the attacks were coming from, and he was doing a decent job. However, that was until he saw his own death coming. He froze, and it was at that moment that Overhaul sent a large number of spikes towards Sir Nighteye. As the spikes drew closer and closer, Sir looked into the future, but he was shocked. It had changed, because Izuku at that moment stamped his foot on the ground again and broke the path of the spikes coming towards Sir Nighteye. Don't give up just because you see a horrible future. Change is possible, Izuku shouted. While Izuku had saved Sir, Overhaul grabbed Eri and was exiting through the hole that had just opened up because one of his limbs had fallen in due to some heroes above. Izuku turned around and charged after him while Sir tried to stop him, having just witnessed his death and wanting to warn Izuku. As Izuku flew after Overhaul, he yelled for Eri to grab onto him, and at that moment, Eri's quirk activity separated Overhaul from his fusion. This caused her to fall where Izuku had caught her, and he jumped out of the hole since she was his primary target, not Overhaul. However, Overhaul refused to give up so easily. After separating from his first limb, he grabbed the new one that had entered the hole, fused with it again, and went after Izuku. Overhaul now had a much larger form. Overhaul was spouting nonsense about Eri's quirk, saying that neither she nor Izuku knew the true power behind it, a power that could rid the world of oddities. Izuku wished the world were free of oddities, for it could be peaceful, but they would never know, as he refused to subject Eri to Overhaul's experiments. Eri's quirk began to activate, and Izuku felt his body start to rewind. He charged OFA to 100%, allowing the two powers to counter each other. This allowed Izuku to surpass his limits, going beyond 100% to an infinite 100% of OFA, and he fought Overhaul. They exchanged blows, but Izuku could throw much more powerful punches than Overhaul. When Izuku stood up and closed the distance, the fight slowed for both of them in those few moments, and Overhaul, in that instant, knew true fear. No, Overhaul screamed as Izuku bombarded him with the full power of OFA, shattering him and leaving only his main body, which fell to the ground. Overhaul and Izuku landed on the ground. Izuku still had Eri strapped to his back and asked if she was alright, but he maintained the full power of OFA since his quirk was still active. It was then that Overhaul attempted one last attack with a stone hand, and Eri's quirk affected him. It reminded him of his normal form. This caused Overhaul to be knocked unconscious, as he was now completely drained of energy. Eri and Izuku's quirks shut down when Eraserhead arrived, and Eri fell asleep. Eraserhead took her to an ambulance to be taken to a hospital while Izuku watched Sir Nighteye leave with other heroes and Mirio. Sir Nighteye was shocked. This wasn't the future he had seen. He and Izuku were supposed to be dead, and Eri lost. Sir Nighteye just looked at Izuku and asked how fate had changed. "You're not a god, Sir Nighteye. Even if your quirk allows you to see the future isn't set in stone. Besides, I'm pretty sure my quirk does plenty of impossible things, and I wouldn't be surprised if it allowed me to fight against fate itself." Izuku said this while whispering the last part into Sir's ear. Then he walked away toward an ambulance because he was tired and felt like he would collapse soon. Everyone was taken to the hospital, and the mission came to an end. Third-person POV. Izuku had awakened from his dream. He had been able to access one for all in all the dreamscapes quite a few times without any issues. The past users said it was because they could open the connection from their side much more effectively than the past users. Normally, they could only do the first phantom vision they experienced during the sports festival, but One for All had synchronized with Izuku far more than the past users, allowing them to open the connection much more and communicate with him. This had helped Izuku a lot, as they had been teaching him different fighting styles they used in the past, but they had also been working much more on building his confidence. Izuku decided to get up and move around during the day since the festival was coming up soon and they were still working on it. Izuku also wanted to visit Eri, since she would be staying at UA from now on and living with her teacher, Eraserhead. Izuku didn't know how to feel about it. In general, Izuku trusted him as a hero, but not so much as a teacher because of how unhelpful Eraserhead had been in the classroom. Bakugo wasn't as aggressive as he used to be, which helped, but Izuku still didn't trust his teacher, or any of the teachers, enough to fully rely on them. Therefore, Izuku placed his trust in Eraserhead as a hero, not as a teacher, and hoped he would be good to Eri, but Izuku would remain vigilant. Eri was taken to school the day before, and Izuku was to meet her along with Mirio, who had also become friends with her. Eri was overjoyed to see her hero again after being separated from him in the hospital. The moment she saw Izuku, she ran towards him and shouted, "Deku, number one noticed," but Izuku shuddered slightly as he remembered that he had made it his hero name and that now a small child would call him that. Izuku had considered changing his hero name but didn't know why he would change it and couldn't find a valid reason to change it that others in his class or school would accept without question. Mirio and Izuku doted on Eri throughout the festival, but Izuku soon had to leave and go work on stage on his own. They hadn't managed to make her smile yet, but they were aiming for it. As the show went on, Izuku worked hard. The festival was going really well with the light effects, the music, and the animals. Then Izuku realized something. Eri was smiling. They had done it. They had made her smile. Izuku felt incredibly happy at that moment. Soon the festival was coming to an end, and Izuku decided to go find Eri and Mirio to see how they were doing. They talked for about 30 minutes while the others cleaned up. Eri went over everything she had done and how she felt. Izuku found it truly heartwarming to be able to help her smile again. It reminded him that perhaps her smiles weren't always fake either, since only some of them were genuine, and yet no one noticed. Soon the day was drawing to a close, and the festival had ended. Before Aizawa-sensei took Eri back to the teacher's dormitory, where she was already settled, Izuku took out a caramel apple he had baked for her and gave it to her. Her smile lit up once more. A few weeks passed, and the students who had failed the provisional exam had passed their makeup exams. Izuku was still working for Sir Nighteye, refusing to break down in front of him. Sir Nighteye had softened his approach to Izuku, but he remained strict. He had given up trying to force Izuku to hand over One for All, having come to accept him as the 9th user. However, Izuku was never informed that Sir Nighteye had abandoned his goal of having him pass on. Therefore, Izuku still believed the agency was only employing him to further dehumanize him until he broke. He noticed Sir Nighteye light up and assumed he was simply changing his strategy to break Izuku. Therefore, Izuku took everything the man said very seriously, since he had never received praise for anything he had done while working with Sir Nighteye. He noticed that Mirio was praised for his work and corrected when he made a mistake, but Izuku didn't receive the same treatment as the other jobs. Izuku realized that Sir Nighteye still didn't want him around, or so he thought. After another week, the students of Class 1A and the Big Three were hanging out with Eri in the dorm common room when their teacher announced that some guests had arrived. It was the wild cat. They had also brought Kota along so he could meet Eri and see Izuku again, who had saved him at Muscular's camp. Izuku introduced Kota to Eri and hoped they would get along. Kota simply asked if Eri had also been saved by Izuku, and she said yes and just hugged Izuku's leg. Seeing this, Kota grabbed Izuku's other leg and held it tightly. They stared at each other, and then Kota noticed Eri's horn and said, "Fellow horns." While pointing to his hat, Eri smiled a little before they both approached the toys the students had bought for Eri for the dorms. Soon the conversations resumed among everyone else, and they talked about many different things. It was also time to announce the new rankings. So, they turned on the television and watched them while Kota and Eri played on the floor. Time skip. Author's note: now we'll start to deviate from canon. This will take place at the beginning of the second semester, during summer vacation, before classes start. They'll be entering 2A instead of 1A. This means the Big Three have also graduated. Eri is much more outgoing now and is good friends with Kota, who sleeps in the dorms from time to play with Eri, since the school wanted her to have kids her own age. Warning: I will be getting into darker topics. If you don't want to read about dark topics, then stop reading this book because it may contain a lot of them. Also, be warned that there will be a lot of bashing of some characters in this book. All Might, Bakugo, Eraserhead, and their other classmates as well. This will be due to a certain ignorance of their actions or what they say about people without quirks or those with different quirks. Most of them didn't face bullying because of their flashy quirks or other things. Some did face bullying, but not to the degree of people without quirks or those considered to have villainous quirks. Also, Shinso will be in Class 2B since he passed the entrance exam. You will also start seeing Mentor, Master Nezu, since I'm pushing in that direction because their pasts will have similarities, and Nezu will take Izuku under his wing once he finds out what has happened. Summer holidays. Location: Dormitories 2A. Third person POV. The school moved everyone to the new dormitories when the last semester ended. 1A became 2A, and 2A became 3A. The former Big Three had now graduated, and the start of the new semester was approaching. Izuku had trained very hard during the last few months of the previous semester and the summer break. He wanted to gain more control over One for All, and the former users suggested various training programs to help him develop muscles like theirs. They had him work on building denser, more compact muscles instead of bulky ones like All Might. The reason for this was that it's less about muscle size and more about the number of muscle fibers and how his body is accustomed to using One for All. Therefore, under the guidance of the former users, Izuku was now at 50% control of One for All. However, he only told All Might and the others that he had 25% control. Now, people might think it's strange that he doesn't tell anyone he now has 50% of his quirks under control, but the thing is, there were some controversial things said in the last few weeks that Izuku felt were off. It all started with a news report on TV. The report was about a list of quirks that were less desirable due to a lack of quirk use. Then it happened. Izuku saw his classmates start making jokes about some of the quirks. Even those Izuku strongly believed had been bullied growing up were making jokes. Izuku didn't join in. He sat there with his fake smile and just listened as they made cruel jokes about some of the quirks and how they confronted those who had them. Then someone made the comment that shattered Izuku's fake smile, if anyone had even been paying attention. Though no one was. Luckily for Izuku, Bakugo wasn't in the room since he was out training. My god, it must be awful to be a person without quirks. Do they still exist or have they all gone extinct for genetic reasons? That's what a classmate said. Some laughed, while others said it was unlikely they still existed, and if they did, they'd be old people. Some even commented that they would hate not having any quirks, since they'd be bitter about not having gotten one like everyone else. Izuku decided he'd had enough and slipped out of the room unnoticed. Even after leaving, he continued listening. He heard what sounded like Iida say that a quirkless person would likely be much weaker and could cause problems during villain attacks. Izuku was shocked that his friends would say such things. They were no better than the people from his childhood. Everyone looked down on quirkless people and assumed they'd be a nuisance, that they'd be weak. How ridiculous, since anyone could be a problem and weak in a villain attack. Just look at how Bakugo fared against the mud villain. All those quirkless people and heroes, and they did absolutely nothing. It was then that some of Izuku's walls began to rebuild, and he knew he had to shut himself off from his classmates. He didn't like how this second semester was starting, as he was now beginning to see the true faces they had been hiding. Although he couldn't blame them for not bringing it up until now, since the topic hadn't come up yet, Izuku dreaded the days ahead. He knew from Mirio that at the start of their second year, they would have class discussions and homework assignments about quirks and quirkless people, which was part of the quirk history class. Izuku dreaded sitting in class and reading some of the homework, knowing it would likely contain misinformation or that people would come up with false theories about quirkless people. As the last days of summer vacation drew to a close, Izuku distanced himself from his friends and classmates. They began to notice that he was doing the same. Some tried to find time to ask him if he was okay, but he always made excuses about training or going to see All Might, since it was no secret that All Might favored him. Kota and Eri had visited him the day before classes started and noticed that Izuku was also absent. However, Izuku simply steered the conversation away whenever they brought it up. They were worried about Izuku, as they both realized his smile was fake. They knew when someone's smile was fake and could tell it was just an attempt to make them feel happy. Third person POV. It was the first day of school, and the students of Class 2A were going about their day. They were all still trying to understand why Izuku seemed distant with them, but they couldn't figure out what they might have done. Izuku just wore his fake smile to class, and no one noticed that his eyes seemed less bright or that the room seemed less luminous. The only thing they noticed was that Izuku seemed a little tense, and they couldn't figure out why. Because of this, most of them let it go, thinking he would talk to them if there was a problem. Soon the day passed, and now it was the last class of the day. It was time for the history of quirks class, which, if UA continued as before, would cover the history of quirks and discuss people without quirks. Aizawa-sensei entered the room and began the class. He had also noticed that Izuku seemed distant with everyone. Even Eri had commented that Izuku seemed distant with his class, but not with Eri or Kota. Because of this, Aizawa had observed Izuku from a distance whenever possible and hadn't noticed the boy doing anything wrong or out of the ordinary. He simply seemed distant with his class, and the teacher wondered if the students had done or said something that might have caused Izuku to act this way. However, he had a class to teach. We will talk about the history of how freaks emerged and how society has changed over the years. We will also have an open discussion about how to deal with current beliefs surrounding freaks in our society today. Aizawa-sensei affirmed. Soon, the lessons began. They discussed the quirk riots in the early days of quirks and how the government attempted to round up and suppress everyone with a quirk. This proved futile, however, as the quirk gene was already present in most people and passed down to the next generation. Some students were shocked by the treatment people with quirks received in the past. Izuku could only imagine it was similar to how he was treated daily throughout his life, as he remembered being restrained and having words branded onto his skin. The conversation slowly shifted from the origins of rare diseases to how people with rare diseases came to make up the majority of the population. They discussed how, over time, the number of people without rare diseases began to decline, as humans continued to be born with rare conditions. Izuku overheard some mention of how humans were evolving to become stronger overall. He felt a pit in his stomach whenever anything was said in his class about humans getting stronger and more evolved. Soon the conversation turned to the present day. By the present day, quirkless people had become a small minority, with only 20% of the world being quirkless. Aizawa declared, and some students talked about how they couldn't believe there were still quirkless people around. Then, Aizawa-sensei handed out the homework sheets. Izuku's face paled slightly as he read some of the information on the sheet. The class would have an open debate about how they thought society viewed people with weak quirks, mutation quirks, and villainous quirks. However, there was no mention of the discrimination against people without quirks. Izuku's mind went blank. Didn't they consider that people without quirks were discriminated against? Soon they started talking. Much of the conversation focused on how people discriminate against those with quirks and bully them. That, according to statistics, these people had fewer chances of being offered jobs or services outside of companies. Then someone made the comment that made Izuku break down even more. God. I think I'd rather not have any quirks than have a quirk that society considers villainous. I might have more opportunities, Uraraka said. Izuku's heart broke at that, since his own friends didn't know what they were saying. Izuku would have given anything to have even a single villainous quirk in the eyes of society, since it would have spared him the beating, the words carved into his skin, the drive to suicide. Some other students agreed with her, and Aizawa-sensei told them to be quiet and get back to the topic. Going back to the topic. Aren't you going to correct him on the fact that not having a quirk is the worst thing in this society? Izuku thought, his mind racing. As they continued discussing discrimination, Aizawa-sensei asked them how they had enjoyed their lives without discriminating against those with unusual traits who wouldn't be so easily discriminated against. Some shared their experiences, and Izuku could only wish for their comfort. Izuku also noticed Bakugo glancing at him several times throughout the class, and he knew why. Bakugo knew he was an oddball. Izuku then raised his hand and was called. Sensei, what about quirkless people in our society today? Izuku asked, hoping he would talk about it. Izuku hoped his teacher would correct the misconceptions people had about people without quirks. What about eccentric people? Is there no data from our government suggesting they face discrimination? He asked, and Izuku's heart broke. Of course, the government wouldn't report it. They're full of peculiar bastards who approve the rules they make. Quirkless people can't get many jobs, and some hospitals might even deny them medical care. It doesn't matter, Sensei. Izuku said. Some people laughed when he finished speaking. Some also made comments. What discrimination would they face? They don't have a quirk for anyone to discriminate against them. The only thing they're likely to get are pitying looks for not having a quirk in today's society. Yaoyorozu asked. Some students agreed with that statement, and Izuku just wanted to cry. They were unaware of the discrimination that exists in this country. Besides, how could their teacher not check external sources like the UN or sources from other countries? How could he blindly trust that our own country's government was 100% truthful? Izuku noticed Bakugo's eyes were tense as he kept his mouth shut. Izuku didn't blame him, since he was part of the discrimination and no one stopped him. The only reason he was prevented from attacking Izuku was that he now has a quirk. Izuku sat in his seat listening to the class. They were discussing how badly some people suffered from discrimination when Aizawa-sensei showed case examples on the front screen. One of the cases was that of a girl with a mutation that made her look like a demon. He talked about how the school allowed her to be verbally bullied by her classmates and how she was physically harassed for some time before the school was sued for discrimination. It must be nice to be able to sue, since no lawyer would accept a case without peculiarities. Izuku thought his mother had tried to sue his elementary school for quirk discrimination, but there was no law preventing it, nor did they accept the case because they didn't want to represent a quirkless person. This went on and on as each case came up, and Izuku compared it to his own life. Each case barely made a dent. Some cases were made worse by the abuse they suffered at the hands of their own families because of their oddness, if they were considered villains, but even then, Izuku could safely say that his life was worse. Don't get him wrong. He wasn't discounting his experiences, but he doubted that many could go through what he had and come out on top. He knew of other eccentric people he'd met online, whose names he'd learned, and whose cases were far worse. However, each time, the cases were written as suicides or accidents, and no one was actually blamed at all. They reported that the kids were bitter about their lives and decided to end them. However, Izuku knew the truth. They were pushed to that precipice and encouraged to take their own lives, just like he had been. The class bell soon rang, signaling the end of the day. The assignment was to research a case of discrimination and write a report for Aizawa-sensei to read aloud. Izuku wanted to leave the classroom, but Aizawa-sensei asked him to stay for a moment. He wanted to check on Izuku, who seemed withdrawn, but Izuku said everything was fine. Aizawa was skeptical but let him go. Izuku refused to speak. Aizawa was a teacher, and he had just let the class talk about people without quirks as if they were nothing when they made comments about them being weaker, less likely to survive an attack by a villain, and many other things that applied to many other people with quirks as well. It's ironic that a class about the history of quirks and discrimination is full of discrimination. Izuku didn't know if he could continue with his class. He felt like he was suffocating and couldn't breathe near his classmates, as he feared that the moment they knew he didn't have quirks, they would turn against him and leave him to die. He needed to be able to trust his classmates and teachers to survive in the world of heroes and assume they would have his back, but right now, he didn't feel like they would have his back if they knew the truth. Izuku was afraid of them. Izuku felt like he was back in middle school and back when he was younger, when they pinned him to the ground and cut words into his skin. While he had to clean his own blood and patch up his wounds since he couldn't go to a hospital because they would refuse his services like in the past. As Izuku walked through the hallways, some of his friends, if he could still call them that, asked him if he was okay and wanted to know if he would go out with them. Izuku was about to answer them when a voice interrupted him. "I'm sorry, but Izuku has a meeting with me today. I don't know when we'll finish." "Hey," said the voice. Everyone turned around, and Izuku saw who it was. It was Principal Nezu. Izuku was startled and wondered what he had done to make the principal come after him. Nezu gestured to his friends to follow him to his office because he wanted to speak with Izuku privately and had some matters to discuss. Nezu wasn't wearing his usual stern smile, which worried Izuku when he noticed. Nezu's eyes returned to Izuku, and he could tell the boy was hallucinating and analyzing every second of their walk. Nezu was doing the same. Nezu simply told Izuku not to worry and that depending on how this meeting went, everything would be much better for him. Izuku only became more frightened by those words, and Nezu picked up on this, gripping his hands tighter, which Izuku noticed. They both analyzed each other every second of the long walk to Nezu's office, and from that point on, they had to walk in silence. Soon, after a tense silence, they arrived at his office. They even walked past other students and teachers, all of whom avoided them because Nezu no longer had his smile. They were alarmed, since it's never a good sign when Nezu isn't smiling, and everyone knows it. They all wondered what Izuku had done to anger Nezu, but they would be so confused because Nezu wasn't angry with Izuku. He was angry with him, and he would soon explain everything. Third person Pav. Izuku walked down the hallway with Nezu, and soon they arrived at his office. The walk was tense and mostly silent. Nezu quickly made Izuku sit down and offered him lavender tea, which was supposed to help people relax. When Izuku took a sip of the tea, he smelled it and then tasted a little. Even though he was watching Nezu's every move and making sure he didn't add anything to the tea, he still did. He acted like he used to in middle and elementary school because he couldn't trust adults and other students not to tamper with his food or drinks. He made most of his meals whenever he could so he wouldn't have to worry about that problem. Nezu also poured himself some tea and then sat down at his desk with his tablet in front of him. As they enjoyed their tea in silence for a few moments, Nezu set his cup down and looked at Izuku, his mouth forming a thin line. "Izuku, first, I want to apologize for how you've been treated in the past. I've been investigating your past ever since I remembered you being eccentric before One for All. With everything that happened in your first year, I didn't even consider the impact of your past on your current situation. It wasn't until we had the quirk history lesson today that I realized I'd brought up the topic I've wanted to talk to you about for a long time," Nezu said, looking at Izuku. Izuku froze the moment Nezu mentioned his past and felt a wave of fear wash over him. Nezu had known the OFA, so he shouldn't discriminate against him, since he was an animal with a rare trait who also suffered discrimination from humans. Izuku stared at Nezu and waited. Then Nezu began to speak again, knowing that Izuku wasn't going to open up so easily. "I hacked into a camera at your previous schools and gathered all the evidence I could find. A decade of verbal and physical bullying, discrimination, assault, near torture, dehumanization, and so much more. I shouldn't have put this off for so long, and then you had to sit in that class where your teacher and classmates ignored the existence of senseless discrimination, and some even made jokes about it. For that, I'm sorry, Izuku, Nezu said as he stood up and bowed his head. Izuku froze. He'd never had an adult apologize for everything they'd put him through, not even All Might, who was a damn quirkless idiot. Izuku's mouth kept opening and closing without making a sound. Nezu knew Izuku would take a moment. Why now? Why bring it up after all this time? It's not like anything changes. I have to go back to that class where I know I'm surrounded by weirdos who would look down on me the moment they knew I was weird. I don't trust the teachers, and Eraserhead has proven time and again that I can't trust the teachers here either. The fight with Bakugo was self-defense, but I got blamed for it. Today in class, I didn't even believe that quirkless people could be discriminated against, and I didn't stop any of the discrimination they were committing while they were talking about discrimination. So why should I trust you, Nezu, when all the adults, even All Might, have given me reasons not to trust them? Izuku asked, and Nezu was a little surprised by All Might's comment and wondered what he had done to not even have the full trust of his heir. Nezu sat for a second and then began to explain his past. He explained how he was treated like a lab rat in a laboratory where he was studied for having a rare trait. He spoke of being pricked with tools and how they deprived him of food or contaminated his food to observe his reactions. How he would have to follow self-imposed rules to stay alive and wait for his moment of freedom. Izuku felt that Nezu had just repeated his own past, but that wasn't the case, it was Nezu's past. How similar we are is terrifying, Izuku thought. When Nezu stopped, he looked at Izuku and asked him an important question. I've told you my rules on how I've survived the hostile environment, will you tell me yours? Nezu asked. Izuku was stunned for a second before he thought. Then he felt the OFA stirring within him and heard a whisper. We believe you can trust him. He whispered to himself. Izuku knew he could trust the past users who were already in OFA and decided to trust Nezu since they believed him to be trustworthy. Izuku then began to explain the rules he learned to survive. Rule 1. Keep your mouth silent whenever possible. Rule 2. Do not get better grades or perform better than the top students in the class who have a quirk. Rule 3. Do not resist or complain when they decide you need to be punished. Rule 4. Don't go to the police because you should be thankful you're alive. Rule 5. Do not beg them to stop, as only humans have rights because you are not human. Nezu nodded, as the rules were very similar to the ones he had created. He then asked Izuku to explain his past if he felt comfortable, since he only knew much from the videos he had been able to find, as the school didn't have many cameras while he was there. Izuku hesitated, but remembered that OFA believed him to be trustworthy. So, Izuku began to talk about his past. From the beatings where he would come home covered in blood and no one would stop to help him because they knew he wasn't unusual. To the time with the police officer who tried to shoot him when he revealed the crimes committed against him and how he learned not to trust the police. How he learned not to let his true strength or intelligence show, or else he would be punished. How he learned to accept the beatings and punishments because they could be much worse, and he spoke of the words etched on his skin. Nezu grew darker with each passing second. He listened to Izuku explain so much about his past, and Nezu felt sick. How can you humans do this to your own race? Nezu thought, and then he saw it, the deep-seated rage inside Izuku. He could see it in the eyes hidden behind the determination. Nezu knew he had to deal with that rage, or one day Izuku would explode, and everyone would be screwed by the consequences. Nezu was making many plans in his mind about how to help Izuku. Then Nezu realized something he could do. Izuku, thank you for sharing your past with me. I'd like to see the scars someday when you're comfortable, but that can wait. Nezu said, and Izuku could only see tears streaming down his face as he confided in an adult who didn't immediately reject him. Nezu then asked him why he didn't trust All Might. Izuku paused for a second, then spoke. Can you blame me? I trust him as a hero, but as a mentor, teacher, or adult in my life. No, let's remember how we met. He saved me from a villain I would have killed myself with just 30 minutes earlier, though he didn't know it. I had clung to him because I wanted to ask if a quirkless person could be a hero. The moment the words, quirkless, were uttered, he stopped me from explaining anything else about myself. He blocked my path and told me no, to be realistic, and to become a police officer or a paramedic, there are laws and regulations that prevent quirkless people from doing that. Most quirkless people also can't get into most of the good schools. Not to mention that most of us don't even survive because of the abuse we endure. After that, he left me on a rooftop after crushing my dreams, and later I saved Bakugo from the same villain who attacked me. No hero was doing anything, and he was about to stop breathing from lack of oxygen. They criticized me for getting involved while they weren't doing anything. All Might had to save the day, and later he found me and offered me OFA. Now, remember that at this point I didn't have OFA, but after 8 months of training on the beach, I got OFA and figured out how to use it pretty quickly. The funny thing is, he told me to clench my butt and yell, "Smash." Yeah, no. Then we can move on to the fact that he never told me anything about AFO. Yeah, that was fun to learn. He didn't tell me about Sir Nighteye's vision that he was going to die and leave me to learn on my own. He also didn't tell me that Mirio was someone Sir wanted in OFA. So, I had to go through my work study, and I still do, with someone who doesn't really want to teach me anything. I'm there so Sir Nighteye can be cruel to me because he doesn't think a personality-less kid like me deserves OFA and that Mirio should go instead. The only reason I haven't left is that it would raise questions I'd have to answer to the school and my friends. How do you think that would be resolved? And it would also be admitting I wasn't fit for OFA. Also, here's a fun fact I haven't told All Might. I can actually use 50% of OFA, not the 25% I've told people. Furthermore, I can talk to the former OFA users almost all the time, and they're not happy with All Might either. They also refuse to allow OFA to be transferred from me unless I'm dying or I find my successor in the distant future, Izuku said with a long sigh. Nezu was furious at all the information he had just learned. His grip on the teacup had broken it without him even realizing it. He was furious with All Might and Sir Nighteye, furious with Eraserhead and the rest of the staff for failing Izuku, and furious with himself for not seeing any of this coming. He himself had failed Izuku all this time by not having this meeting sooner. Then Nezu realized what Izuku had said about hiding behind mental and physical strength. Nezu realized that he might have found an answer that would resolve almost everything if this had been handled directly. Izuku, I want you to take a test for me, so I can see your IQ and where you are in your education right now. Take all the time you need. Nezu said this as he took out several tests and handed them to Izuku, who had just started taking them and was making decent progress. About an hour later, Izuku had finished, and Nezu was astonished. He was almost as fast as Izuku, who had completed it in 30 minutes. His best employee had taken an hour and 40 minutes to finish that test. Nezu began grading it and found very few incorrect answers. Izuku had just passed his hellish test with a 90%, the highest score of which was only 75%, and that was from his staff. The test showed that Izuku's IQ wasn't as high as his own, but it was one of the highest he had ever seen in a human. Nezu was astonished. This will work really well if Izuku agrees, Nezu thought. Nezu set up the test and told Izuku his results. Good job, Izuku. You passed with 90%, the previous highest score on this test being 75%. This test is my test that I give to all my teachers, and it had an IQ test inside. Your IQ is one of the highest I've ever seen, Nezu said with a smile on his face, and it wasn't one of those fake smiles either, it was real, since he had just found a solution in a new project. Izuku was pleased to learn where his education and IQ stood. The test showed that he had enough education to pass all of UA's classes and take university-level courses with relative ease. However, what Nezu said next surprised Izuku. Izuku, how about you become my personal student and transfer from 2A to 2N, which would be my private heroic class for both of us. Furthermore, I'll have your dorm relocated to be near my dorm, which is located in a separate building near the staff dorms. Nezu said. Izuku froze at the offer. He didn't want to go back to class 2A, he didn't want to deal with the eccentric classmates and fear they'd find out he wasn't quirkless, he didn't want to be taught by another teacher he couldn't trust. At that moment, he was truly happy. Yeah, Izuku shouted. It was at that moment that a new person would be born into the world and the old person known as Deku would be extinguished. Third person Pav, Izuku had just yelled in Nezu's office and then realized he had done it. He lowered his head, afraid of being yelled at again like in the past. All he felt was a swipe at his head. He slowly looked up, fear hidden in his eyes, and saw Nezu standing there with a faint smile on his face that showed sadness. "Don't worry, I won't hurt you. I won't be like those from your past, Izuku. We're too similar to hurt each other on purpose. People like you and me are meant to be together," Nezu said as he bent down and hugged Izuku. Izuku froze, since the only person who hugged him was his mother. Izuku started to cry and thanked Nezu. After sitting there for about 30 minutes, they calmed down. "Now, there are a few things we need to talk about. 1. What do we do about Bakugo now that I know about his actions? 2. What about his old schools and classmates? 3. Your mother has to approve the transfer, which means she'll want to know all of this." "I'm guessing she doesn't know yet," Nezu declared, and Izuku nodded. He truly didn't want Bakugo to be punished so severely that he would lose his dream of becoming a hero. However, he knew Nezu wouldn't let him get away with it. Nezu and Izuku talked for about 30 minutes, and Nezu agreed to speak to his mother about Bakugo, but Nezu was free to pursue the other students. Izuku also knew that his mother would need to know, even though he wanted to continue hiding it. Izuku needs to know, her support in this will be much better. Besides, she's going to be hurt no matter what. Because you've been hurt so much all this time and because you kept it from her. However, I promise I won't abandon her. We should also tell her about OFA, since she needs to be in the group that knows her. To be honest, All Might should have told her from the beginning," Nezu said. Izuku hesitated but agreed to let Nezu call her. Thus, Nezu called Inko Midoriya. "Hello, Mrs. Midoriya." "Yes, I'm Nezu. Your son is physically unharmed." "Yes, I know how I've phrased it. I believe this will be an important conversation that you should be present for, and no, Izuku isn't in any trouble. I've learned something about his past that you need to be involved in." "Yes, I'll see you in about 20 minutes. Nezu then hung up the phone and looked at Izuku. "Would you like to play chess while we wait? We can play a game of questions while we wait, and each piece you take earns you a question." Dijo Nezu. Soon they were playing chess, and Izuku was doing well in challenging Nezu. Nezu was enjoying himself. The first question: upon becoming your personal student, could I have more physical contact with you someday when you feel comfortable with it? I know that with your past and everything, it will be difficult, Izuku asked. Nezu looked up and saw that Izuku only had good intentions, as he was deprived of much positive reinforcement in his life. Nezu agreed that as their relationship grew, they could move on to more physical touch and hugs that felt good. Nezu knew they both lacked positive reinforcement because of their past and thought he would enjoy a good hug now and then. He hated doing it with humans, as they had hurt him in the past, but he didn't hold it against Izuku, as they were very similar. Nezu then picked up a piece and asked his question. "Do you think you'll open up more to All Might in the future?" He's going to have a lot of questions that I'll refuse to answer since this will be private. I'll only tell him what he allows me to, and only the bare minimum without his approval, Nezu said. Izuku thought for a few moments and remembered OFA. All of Might deserved to know, but Izuku thought of a way for him to find out without telling him directly. Tell him to look up statistics on people without eccentricities. I know Japan doesn't report it, but the UN does, and some other countries criticize Japan for its policies. So, the information is out there. Also, tell him to look for jobs that eccentric people can get. Then, depending on what he finds, I'll tell him based on his reactions. Izuku said that, and Nezu thought it was fair. They soon played 2 chess games and both won one. Then, just as they were about to start the third game, there was a knock at the door. Inko had arrived, detected by the door camera. "Come in," Nezu shouted. Inko entered and saw Izuku playing chess with the principal and noticed he had tear marks on his cheek. "Hello, Director Nezu." "Hello Izuku. May I ask what's wrong?" "My son has tear marks on his face," Inko asked worriedly. Nezu looked at Izuku and asked him point blank. "It's either you or me. I think it's fine to tell her if you feel uncomfortable, but there will be some points you'll need to fill in. I can remember everything you told me, but if there's anything you want added, then please stop me," Nezu said, and Izuku simply asked Nezu to do it since he didn't dare talk to his mother about it. Inko was becoming increasingly worried. Mrs. Midoriya, please sit down. You're not going to like what we have to talk about and we're going to be here for a while. That's fine, Nezu said as he prepared tea for her. Inko simply told him to call her Inko since he was her son's principal. He replied by telling her to stop calling him principal then. Inko, how much do you know about your son's past? How much do you know without him telling you? He asked her, and she looked confused. Of course, she knew about his past since he was her son. He told her so, and Nezu nodded and then sighed. Inko, that means you don't know anything about that then. I want you to watch this video. Nezu said, looking confused and a little insulted. Then, the video played, her eyes widened with each second. She wondered how she had never known while sitting there watching her son being restrained and having words branded onto his skin. How? I've seen the skin and it's not there, she said. Izuku opened his mouth and spoke. Heroic grade wax concealer. A pretty decent stuff that doesn't come off easily without the remover. Izuku affirmed. Inko asked if she could see him. Izuku froze. Nezu got involved at that moment. Inko. I suggest you don't pressure him about it right now. We're bringing up his entire life here, and there's much more to it than that. It'll take time for Izuku to get used to not hiding it from me or you. This video is just one of many, Nezu said as Inko sat in absolute silence. How come I never knew? He asked while looking at Izuku. I became good and quick at hiding everything and I became very street smart at finding suppliers of medical supplies since I couldn't go to a hospital, Izuku said. Nezu wanted to bring it up again later, but he had to move on. He then explained everything Izuku had told him and even mentioned one for all in his encounters with All Might, whom he himself had just met that day. I'm so sorry I let your son down. I should have had this conversation last year, ever since I learned about OFA and his rarity. I knew about the statistics, but I didn't remember them until recently, when we had a class on discrimination, which he sat down for today. Nezu explained what had happened in the classroom and dormitories since she reviewed the security camera footage. Inko was angry with the UA staff, but she was also angry with herself. Inko, if you'd like, I have a suggestion that Izuku has accepted. It will resolve many problems that are just on the surface. It's not a definitive solution, but it will begin to help him heal. I want him to become my personal student and a student in Class 2N. Nezu said. Then he explained the test results and how Izuku had been hiding his true mental and physical strength because of his old rules. Then he explained the rules to Inko. She was crying her eyes out. She had started crying earlier, but now she was so angry with herself that she didn't even realize when he was standing right in front of her. These rules are how people like your son and I have survived in this world for so long. He and I are so alike it's frightening. We've both been lab rats, stripped of our rights. Nezu said. Inko has found out everything. Bakugo, the schools, OFA, and the fact that her son was far smarter than anyone knew, which could make Nezu the smartest person on this floor at chess. I had no reason to reject him. Would Izuku stay in the same dormitories? She asked worriedly if she had to be with them for so long. Nezu told her no, and that she would be living in the same building as him, which was separate from all the other buildings. I'm a person who enjoys my peace and quiet. I don't like having others around when I sleep, but I'm making an exception for your son since we're so similar that my instinct doesn't tell me to keep him away, but rather to claim him as my kit. Nezu said, and Izuku just blushed at that and hid his face. Everyone laughed at him for it. I'm also going to prepare a presentation on discrimination without quirks that all hero courses will have to review this year. I'm halfway through it right now, and I'll show it after Izuku is removed from the class starting tomorrow. I'm not going to let him go back there. I can't expel them all for being ignorant, but I can take a firm stance. Especially with my teachers, who should have gone into more detail. Nezu said as he apologized to Inko for his teacher's mistake. Inko approved of the agreement and signed the release forms. Nezu ordered the robots to begin cleaning Izuku's room immediately, as the cameras had captured the entire Class 2A in the common rooms. He wanted Izuku to move into the new room by tonight. There is no more danger to my team, Nezu thought for a moment and realized what he had been thinking. Then he realized that Izuku hadn't rejected him before, so he gave in to his animalistic impulses. Ah, one more document. I would like to request partial guardianship over Izuku and full guardianship in case of your death since your husband does not live here in Japan. Nezu said as he took out the papers. I want this so that, in case you can't be contacted, I can make decisions to ensure her safety. I refuse to let any more idiots hurt her. You would still have even more power over me. Which means that if I made a decision, you could easily overturn it. Nezu said. Inko looked at Izuku and then nodded after seeing the confident look on his face. She hadn't seen that look in a long time. Izuku too, since he just signed up for therapy. I can help a little, but I'm going to send you the therapists I've used. I trust my main therapist, and he knows everything about my past. Just don't tell him about OFA and say you were a late bloomer. That's too much secrecy unless you really like him, and you can decide to bring him along later, but warn him about the risks first. Nezu said, leaving no room for debate. Izuku just pouted in his chair. Now that everyone's up to date, we have to decide what happens with this Bakugo Katsuki guy. Izuku has said he doesn't want his dream ruined, so expulsion is out of the question unless you plan to get him arrested, Inko. Then my hands are tied. Nezu said. Inko sat in silence. She didn't know what to do. She had come to think that her nephew's son, her friend, was a good boy with just an attitude problem, but that was wrong. Sweetie, are you sure you don't want him to be punished any further? Inko asked her son. Yes, he's been changing. He's also a victim of his environment, but not as badly as me, nor physically as I am. UA has been changing him. However, I know he needs harsh punishments from UA to change for good, Izuku said. Inko gave up on changing her mind. Nezu then spoke upon seeing this. As such, we can do many things. I will require several marks on his hero record no matter what. Also, community service until graduation, and quirk-canceling bracelets to stop his quirk. They'll still allow it to function, but he'd have to exert himself greatly to activate it while wearing them. Furthermore, he'll be prevented from being grouped with Izuku, though they won't train together anymore, depending on my lessons for him. He'll also be tested throughout his second year, and this will be extended into his third year depending on his results. In addition, he'll be required to undergo therapy and anger management classes as well, Nezu said, and Inko and Izuku were happy about it. They soon discussed the other students from their past in the schools. Nezu had free rein to do as he pleased and could sue on Izuku's behalf because of the guardianship papers Inko had signed, which made things easier. He would also keep Inko informed. Nezu was also going to warn All Might about his actions and caution him to be careful how he treated Izuku in the future, but that would come after the lesson he needed on discrimination in today's society. The staff would be required to listen to the presentation as well and would have to undergo training to ensure they recognized the signs of it in the classroom, since they had screwed up Bakugo earlier in the year with how he treated Izuku. Nezu would also take the classes since he had also messed up. The meeting soon came to an end, and Nezu said goodbye to Inko, as did Izuku. He promised to try to open up more over time. Inko accepted this and went home to relax after the long meeting. Nezu told Izuku that their belongings had been moved and that they could go to their new rooms, which Nezu noted were better than the dormitories. Third-person POV. Izuku and Nezu headed to the private building that was only for Nezu, and now only for Nezu and Izuku. Only they could enter the building unless a staff member entered the emergency code that granted them access. They were warned not to use it unless someone was important and couldn't be held until the next day or until they returned to their office. As they approached the building, Izuku was stunned. This isn't a normal building. It's a real house. Izuku said. Yes, it's my house, which I paid for with my own money to be built in this small section of woods behind the school. However, now it's our house, Nezu said as he led Izuku to it. The area had a sign warning students to stay away and cameras were located both in the surrounding area and inside the forest. Izuku was impressed. Izuku was shown the house, and Nezu even showed him the hidden tunnels that connect the house to the school. I've added you to the tunnel system. Only you and I can go through them. They aren't very big, so most people can't fit through, but with your height, if you bend down you should be able to squeeze through. Others would have to crawl. You could also use the OFA to help you get through them quickly, said Nezu. Izuku was very happy with his new lodgings and how well Nezu treated him. It was nice that someone knew all about his past and accepted him. This wasn't like the users from the past, since they were trapped inside OFA. This was a living person he could interact with at any time. Thanks, Nezu, Izuku said as he covered his face, unable to believe he had just done that. Really? I'm getting attached to him so quickly because he showed me so much kindness and our pasts are similar. Izuku thought. Nezu had also been frozen, but he recovered. No problem, kid, Nezu accepted the role, as his animal instincts compelled him to. They went berserk whenever Izuku was involved because of the similarities in their pasts. Soon Izuku went to the kitchen and prepared a meal for them after asking what his new father could eat. It turned out he had no problem eating anything a human could. I'm really thinking you're a chimera and a mix between a dog, a bear, and a rat, Izuku said, and Nezu froze. Izuku looked at him and wondered what he had said. Great job. You're the first person to realize that my cryptic message was a real message of what it was, Nezu said. Izuku started laughing at the way Nezu delivered his message, since he threw everyone off when he said, "Who cares because I'm the principal?" Izuku found it funny, as well as his situation. You know, a few months ago, if someone had asked me if All Might was the closest thing to a father, I would have denied it, but it would be true. It turns out I had a chimera willing to step forward and be my father, Izuku stated, and Nezu laughed at the fact that he had just stolen Izuku from All Might and hadn't even noticed. Oh, I'm going to enjoy All Might's face when he realizes all this. Nezu chuckled as he sipped his tea. They sat down and enjoyed their meal and tea, discussing various topics. Izuku then brought up his hero name and asked how difficult it would be to change it. Nezu knew where it came from and readily agreed to change it. They continued brainstorming possible hero names and soon found one. Nezu retrieved some papers from his study, returned, and filled them out. Izuku knew he would have to try to convince Eri not to call him that, but he knew it would be difficult. The same goes for Kota. They also discussed transferring his work study to Nezu himself, as he wanted to expand Izuku's mental powers and transform him into a hybrid of daytime heroes and Nezu's abilities, effectively turning Izuku into a walking disaster due to his combined one-for-all power and Nezu's teachings. Izuku readily agreed, and Nezu would handle the paperwork. I can't wait to talk to Sir Nighteye from today. Oh, the fun I'll have with him, Nezu thought. While Nezu and Izuku enjoyed their time at home, the entire Class 2A was in the dorms wondering when Deku would return to school. Oh, how naive to think he'd come back. The hours passed, and curfew approached. They wondered if he had already returned without their knowledge, so Iida, Uraraka, and Todoroki went upstairs to check on his dorm. They were surprised to find the door open, and when they looked inside, they found nothing. The room was completely empty. That, Iida said aloud. They went downstairs to inform the others. Guys, we have a problem. Deku's room is empty. The door was open and the room is completely clear of his belongings. He's gone, Uraraka said. This set off alarm bells for everyone. They all decided to notify their teacher about her disappearance, and Aizawa-sensei was also surprised since he hadn't heard anything about it. Is this what made him disappear? Was he planning to leave without telling anyone? Aizawa thought. He told everyone to stay in the dormitories and that he would ask the other teachers and check with the principal if they knew anything. Soon Aizawa arrived at the dormitory building that housed all the other staff members who weren't staying with their students. He asked them if they knew where Midoriya had gone since 2A had reported that his room was empty and confirmed it before he arrived. The staff was shocked. All Might was shocked. They didn't know anything. All Might took out his phone and tried to call Izuku, but it went straight to voicemail. It goes straight to voicemail, All Might said. The teachers were more worried, since they hadn't heard that he had left, and if he had, why did he do it? Soon, Eraserhead took out his phone and called Nezu, putting it on speakerphone. You're on speakerphone, Nezu. We have a problem. Midoriya is gone. His room has been emptied, and no one knows where he is. All Might tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail, Aizawa said. There was silence for a few seconds. Then Nezu spoke. I know, and Nezu asked. Were they surprised by the way the principal had just acted with a missing student who seemed to know what happened? What do you mean you know? Where is it? All the might asked. Nezu then answered. I've already spoken with Inko Midoriya. The situation is being addressed. You'll all be informed about what happened in due course. I assure you, there will be a staff meeting about this later, and I'll tell you about it. Also, on a side note, 2A and 2B will need to watch a presentation I sent to everyone. Don't open it until your homeroom class and present it there. Everyone will see its contents at the same time. The rest of the staff can also present it in their classes, but it's mandatory for second-year students. I just want to say that I'm disappointed in my staff regarding the events that led to this. I also take some of the blame, but certain staff members should have done better. You'll know who they are when you see the presentation tomorrow, Nezu said in a cheerful tone. The staff were speechless. They had to wait for his answer, and they didn't like that fact because they felt something big was about to happen, and that they were the cause of it. Aizawa looked at the others and said he had to talk to his class and that he had to leave. He soon returned and found his class waiting. They saw him and wanted answers he didn't have. I really don't know anything. No one on the staff knows, except for Nezu, who refuses to talk. He said we'd find out what happened to Midoriya later. We also have a presentation tomorrow that I have no idea what it's about. I think it's related to Midoriya, and we'll learn some things about it in class tomorrow. Go to sleep and get ready for tomorrow. I have a feeling there will be some changes happening, and they might not be good for everyone, Aizawa stated. The class didn't like this answer but had no choice but to accept it. They quickly ate dinner and went to bed, worried about Deku. Bakugo seemed torn between his emotions. He felt that Deku's disappearance was connected to the lesson they had learned and to the aspect of his strangeness. He reviewed his memories and felt certain it was related to her. However, he didn't realize the storm that was brewing for him and everyone else. When everyone went to sleep, Nezu and Izuku slept soundly that night. Everyone woke up early for the next day and was eager for what would happen. They all dressed early and arrived at their classroom ahead of schedule. They found a projector and a laptop already set up to show the presentation, just like yesterday's. Soon their teacher entered, and everyone knew from the feeling in the room that they were missing their sunshine. They hadn't realized how important he was to the class after he left so quickly. He was more or less the heart of the class and kept it going. They wanted him back, but they would soon discover that it wasn't so easy. Aizawa told everyone to be quiet and get ready. He also suggested they take notes because he didn't know what the presentation was about or if Nezu would do anything with it. Aizawa quickly pressed the buttons and then pulled out the email sent by Nezu. He opened the video and saw that it was from Nezu himself. Am I a dog, a bear, a rat? It doesn't matter, because I'm here to give a presentation you really need, since I've observed high levels of discrimination within my school. Ironic, considering some classes were covering this topic for some of the students. Now, this presentation will focus more on the issue of discrimination and how most people don't realize the brutal lives these people face in our society. Our own government doesn't report on this issue because of prejudice and the most outlandish beliefs. Nezu affirmed this as he took a sip of tea and refocused. Today we'll be talking about quirkless discrimination. The 20% of the world's population that everyone forgets about most of the time faces discrimination, and very harsh discrimination at that. Even though our government and society like to pretend it doesn't happen. That's why the UN and many other countries criticize Japan for our outdated policies. The laws haven't really changed in 200 years. Warning: this is going to get brutal and disturbing. If you can't handle this, I suggest you leave now, but be warned, I'll ask you to watch a different version. Nezu said. None of the students from 2A left. They were all surprised by the presentation since they had been talking about this yesterday when Midoriya brought up the topic. Third POV. The students of Class 2A and the teacher were surprised. This presentation was about the non-quirk discrimination that Deku had brought up the day before. It was also before he disappeared and was last seen before he spoke with Nezu. Everyone wondered if it was related. Iida asked his teacher a question. Sensei, I thought you said there was no discrimination without oddness, Iida asked. Her teacher was worried because there was no data to suggest that there was one. There are no government reports, but I suppose according to Nezu I should have gone outside of our own government. Aizawa-sensei declared. He felt guilty about what he had said to Midoriya the day before. Now it was clear that this was an important matter, and he took out paper and a pencil and began preparing to take notes. He went and sat at Midoriya's desk since it seemed he would be a student today. Take notes. This is going to be very important in some way that will affect us all. Aizawa said as he sat down at the empty desk. Everyone saw that he was also preparing to take notes. Now, let's start with some simple truths. 20% of the world's population lacks quirks. However, in the case of Japan, it's around 5%. Of that 5%, 3% belong to the older generations, meaning that 2% are born each year. Quirkless people are those born without any unusual features. They have no unique traits or anything that would place them in the superhuman category like the rest of the world. Instead, they become normal humans in an abnormal world. These people constitute a minority in the world, with approximately 20% of the global population being quirkless. However, countries like the United States have a population without quirks that hovers around 15%, most of whom are from the younger generations. Why is this important? Well, the United States is one of the countries that most criticizes Japan regarding its laws on quirkless people. Unlike the United States, Japan hasn't changed its laws in almost 200 years, meaning there are no laws protecting people with quirks. The law is blind when it comes to this group of people and demonstrates a lack of justice for them. How? Let's look at the case of a boy born to two parents with quirks. On his 4th birthday, he was diagnosed as having no quirks. No trace of quirks was found at that time. After receiving this news from the doctor, the father abandoned them. He was lucky, as the mother stayed. Most parents abandon their children on the streets, where they die very young, or they put them into the system. When they grow up, they quickly learn that not all men are born equal. They learn this at age 4 when their friends turn against them, their teachers turn against them, and sometimes their parents. In this case, all the students and friends this boy had turned their backs on him. They began verbally abusing him. Soon, within a few years, they escalated to physical abuse as well. All of this happened in elementary school, where the teachers saw it but did nothing. This is because our society views people without features as inferior, weak, and useless, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Fun fact. Did you know that some of the best inventions and support equipment on Snow Island come from scientists without quirks? Didn't you know? They're just as wired as the rest of us, but in Japan, they're bullied because of our beliefs. Now, back to the boy. If he's lucky, 1 or 2 teachers might take pity on him and try to help, but they won't do much. They won't reprimand the other children because they have quirks. They wouldn't risk the life of a child with quirks for the sake of a child without. It's sad, isn't it? Now, if the child is lucky, they will be called by their real name, but most of the time the adults and students will find cruel names to replace it. Like useless, freak, or many other things. The teachers even called the child these things and began to dehumanize them. They can't feel guilty for their actions if they don't see the child as a human being. Soon the child will learn the rules of survival. Some of the common rules that strange children would follow in their minds would be the following. Rule 1. Keep your mouth silent whenever possible. Rule 2. Do not get better grades or perform better than the top students in the class with oddities. Rule 3. Do not resist or complain when they decide you need to be punished. Rule 4. Don't go to the police because you should be thankful you're alive. Rule 5. Do not beg them to stop, as only humans have rights because you are not human. However, these rules don't always keep them safe, as sometimes children and adults are feeling particularly cruel on those days. They then learn to hide their hurt from their parents, if they have any left. If they have caregivers, it's doubtful they'll care, as they too might be abusing the child. The caregivers would see it as an opportunity to hide the hurt they inflict on others. By the time the child turns 10, mild physical and verbal bullying often escalates into full-blown abuse and borders on torture. Yet, in the eyes of the law, nothing illegal was being done, as no police officer or adult would bother listening to the eccentric child. Even if they did, most of those below the line would kill the case. An example of Rule 4 for this child is when this boy turned 11. He tried to ask a police officer for help. Guess what the officer did? Help. PFF'd, as if. The officer threatened to kill the boy. Don't bother the police with your petty problems. You should be lucky I don't shoot you now and tell you that you attacked me, you unfunny space junk, said the officer as he walked away when he realized the boy wasn't funny. So the police are gone, the teachers are gone, most adults are gone. Who do they trust? Nobody. They hide their pain and injuries as best they can and get on with it the next day. These children quickly learn whether someone can be trusted or not. They can tell what a person means through their eyes. They use this to survive by making deals with black market dealers, sometimes to get medicine they couldn't afford or that the store refuses to sell them. Most stores will turn away a child without unusual features or overcharge them if they discover the child doesn't have them. Even hospitals refuse entry to people without unusual features because they don't want to help them. Years will pass, and the child will learn to hide their body with baggy clothes to conceal their injuries or physical condition. They might be starving, or if they still have a parent who feeds them, they'll be well nourished and exercised. They do this so they can run away and escape their school bullies or even random people on the street. You see, people will sometimes try to kill children without surgery if they know about it. However, the death will be reported as an accident caused by a quirk triggering or something the child started. Let's not forget rule number 1. Knowledge is power, so the less people know you're eccentric, the more shops you can buy. You're also less likely to be attacked. Rule number 2 is also a problem in many situations. Rule number 2. Don't get better grades or perform better than the top students in the class with eccentricities. Never break this rule, no matter what, because if you do, it will backfire. Let's look at this boy who remembers the rule very well. He got a higher score than some other children with eccentricities, and they decided they didn't like that. So, they waited until the other students had left and the teacher was ignoring them. They grabbed the boy and held him down, one on each arm. Then one of them took a knife and carved words into the boy's body. Now, remember that they're all the same age, too. That's how cruel they can be. While the child is gagged so they can't scream, many different words are carved into their body. Now they're finished, and the child with the words carved decides to clean the floor, knowing they'll be blamed and punished by the staff. So, they clean up all their own blood and bandage their wound, since children this age carry first aid kits. Some of the things that might be written on their body are things like, quirkless, quirkless freak, monster, or death threats. It depends on the attacker that day. These wounds will leave scars, and the child will have a daily reminder of that day forever. As time goes on, they accumulate more and more injuries, and their bodies become increasingly disfigured. Yet, no one helps them. Even if their parents find out, they can't sue, as no one would take the case, and most laws don't recognize children without traits. This kind of life continues until they finally break down, or something happens. They become villains, keep pushing forward despite being broken and continuing to break down, or 3 of them commit suicide because that sounds like the best way to escape the pain. Furthermore, they are constantly provoked into suicide, which ultimately fuels many of them to choose this third option. Now, this doesn't even take into account life after high school. Seeing as most quirkless kids don't even survive that far. Most have died or been killed due to discrimination. If they have such a strong will to survive, then they'll make it to high school where they'll face horrible lives. Most jobs will refuse to hire them because they're quirkless. They can't go to most of the good schools because they have rules that prevent them from even trying. I'm proud to say that UA is not such a school. About 5 years ago, I got rid of that rule, and a person without quirks can try any course, and if they meet the requirements, then they're in, even if it's the hero course. They can't go to medical school or the police academy because they have rules that block them. Many government laws prevent them from being hired by government agencies as well. This is a good summary of the life of an eccentric person. Now, you might think this is just one of the strangest cases, but it's not. As reported by the UN, quirkless people in Japan face a 95% suicide rate. They face a 96% unemployment rate. They also report many similar cases. They even investigate other cases where quirkless deaths are reported as accidents and find they weren't. They were murdered by an eccentric individual, and the police didn't care because the investigating officer was an eccentric. So, we've been through the lives of most quirkless people. I wonder how many of you still think they're useless. Weak. A waste of space. Because honestly, they're strong. Most of them are stronger than people with quirks, because how many of you can say you could go through all that and survive like some people without quirks do? Even in situations where they're attacked by villains, they have the same chance of dying or getting hurt as someone with a quirk. There's no difference between the two. The only difference is that people are biased. This includes our lesson on the eccentric population. I expect to see better results from my students who chose to be discriminatory at my school. I also expect better results from some of my teachers, and they know who I mean. Nezu said as he finished his speech and the summary of Izuku's life. The students of Class 2A were shocked. They couldn't speak. They had no idea it was so serious. The cases they saw yesterday were like child's play compared to this. The gory details of that person's life were horrifying. Aizawa remained silent. He screwed up. He should have dug deeper, but he was an idiot and stopped when the government had no reports. He's an underground hero, and he ruined everything. Though he wondered how this related to Midoriya, because it did somehow. However, a student asked the question for him. This was shocking, but I wonder how this relates to Deku. Did he know anyone without any distinguishing features? Also, I know why he was acting badly. It started that day in the common room when people were talking and joking about other quirks, and someone mentioned people without quirks and how they probably didn't exist anymore, and some other things. It started after that night. Sue stated. Everyone realized how correct she was. But they were still stuck. That was until Bakugo opened his mouth. It's because he had no peculiarities. Bakugo declared. Everyone's eyes widened and they stared at him in surprise. He's a late bloomer. He acquired it shortly after finishing high school. The first time he used it was in the exam, and the second time I suppose was in Sensei's test on the first day. Bakugo confirmed. Then the door opened. It was Nezu. Correct. Furthermore, I think it's time we talked, Bakugo. You know why. Your parents are waiting for us in my office because we have a lot to discuss. Nezu spoke, his face cold. Poison was dripping from his eyes. Bakugo knew what was going on, and he knew his dream was over. Don't worry, your dream isn't over, unless you decide to ruin your last chance. Midoriya has extended one last olive branch and asked me not to get rid of you. However, the schools and the other students are fair game to me, so I'll get my wish for chaos by destroying them when I destroy their lives. Nezu said. The students were confused, but Aizawa quickly connected the dots. Midoriya being eccentric. Bakugo in trouble. Bakugo was one of Izuku's bullies. Soon the whole class connected the dots. Damn nerd. He's too forgiving. Why does he always forgive me? Bakugo said, his hands tugging at his hair. They could see a tear roll down his face. They were surprised to see him crying. Because you used to be like a brother to him. Though this is the last time I think he'll extend this olive branch. You've made some changes here at UA, and he's noticed. As such, he wants to give you one last chance. Nezu said. The class wondered where Midoriya was. One student asked their principal where Deku was. Sir, where is Deku? Uraraka asked. Nezu's fur bristled at the word Deku, and Aizawa noticed. It's not good. He thought. I suggest you stop using that derogatory term when referring to Izuku, please. It means useless or you can't do anything. Izuku only agreed because he felt pressured to do so. Nezu said, smiling at Uraraka. She tried to say that it meant she could do it, but Nezu still shut her down. It doesn't matter what you're trying to make it mean. That term was the name he was given around age 5, wasn't it, Mr. Bakugo? Izuku felt pressured to comply since he didn't want to risk reliving his entire childhood on the very first day of school. Therefore, he is required to use it. I know we'll have issues with Eri, and we'll work on it. The same goes for Kota. However, Izuku has changed his hero name to Apollo from now on. Nezu said, leaving no room for debate in his cold tone. The students learned to remain silent at that moment. Regarding your first question. Izuku Midoriya is no longer a student in Class 2A. I cannot, with any certainty, leave him in a hostile learning environment. Nezu declared, and the class and Aizawa felt as if they had just been slapped in the face. We didn't mean to be like that with him, we didn't know. Iida declared in a panicked tone, now that he knew what he had done to his friend. Nezu sighed. Indeed, they didn't know. He didn't want people to know because he feared the consequences. Can you blame him? Without you even realizing it, you had done it. Although UA and our society are to blame for not teaching you better. This lesson will be one of many I plan to have at this school, as I refuse to allow this kind of thing to continue happening. I hope that once you graduate, you will set out to make impactful changes to the laws and to society's behavior toward people without quirks, those considered villains, or the weak. Nezu said while waiting for Bakugo, who was gathering all his things. Aizawa needed to know where his student was, no, former student now. He needed to know he was safe. Nezu, where is Midoriya? Is Midoriya safe? Aizawa asked. Nezu received the hidden question. Did Midoriya commit suicide? To answer your hidden question, he didn't. He's alive, so don't worry that he committed suicide. I'm helping him recover. There's a lot of damage, as you know now, based on the case we studied, which is a good description of the life of a quirky kid. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but he'll make it. I've taken him on as my personal student, and he's now a student in Class 2N. My personal student class. Fun fact. Izuku followed the seconds rule pretty well. Not getting higher grades or doing better than those at the top of the class with quirks. Nezu said. The class was a little confused until he revealed what he meant. Although some understood the meaning. It turns out he's by far one of the smartest people I've ever met. He's beaten me at chess several times. He also kept his strength hidden. You know, he recently said he only had 25% control over his quirk. Well, it turns out he has 50% control. It's a power of prey, and a clever one at that. I'm going to have a lot of fun with my new personal student, Nezu announced. Aizawa felt a sense of dread at this fact. A new Nezu with the strength of All Might had just been created. Damn, a Nezu of All Might level who's going to be destructive to anyone who gets in his way. Aizawa declared, and Nezu simply broke into a wide smile. Of course, my new son is powerful. Oh, I forgot that Inko Midoriya also gave me partial custody of him. All Might's face was priceless when he found out I'd stolen his almost son and made him mine. Nezu said with a smile in front of everyone. They agreed not to hide these facts from anyone, since they had spoken with All Might, who apologized profusely to Izuku after finishing reading the email he received from Nezu last night and working on his homework all night. All Might felt very guilty, but Izuku opened up a little more to him and told him about his true strength and how his work study was really going. All Might was furious when he found out what Sir Nighteye was doing. Nezu simply told him that he would speak with him first before All Might could. Soon Bakugo was ready to leave, and they headed to their meeting. Classes were cancelled for the day, as Nezu wanted everyone to give the presentation a lot of thought. Because of this, many of them sat reflecting on how they had betrayed their friend without even realizing it. They felt incredibly remorseful. They wanted to make it up to their friend, but they didn't know how. Third person POV. A full week had passed since the presentation Nezu had created and instructed to be shown to the second-year hero courses. It was an interesting week, to say the least. The relationship between All Might and Izuku had become more open, but it remained somewhat strained. All Might had realized how blind he'd been to the current problems in society, which had almost driven his protege to suicide because of his own words. He had forgotten his own origins and had allowed his protege to feel unable to fully trust him. All Might was glad that Nezu was intelligent enough to realize everything and support Izuku in becoming stronger. It was also time for Nezu to strike at Sir Nighteye. Izuku hadn't shown up for his work-study duties for the past few days, as Nezu had sent an email stating that he was required at school. This gave them some time before Nezu acted, which was now. Therefore, Nezu entered Sir Nighteye's office unexpectedly. The staff in the lobby welcomed Nezu, but they were confused as to why he was there. It was odd for Nezu to show up somewhere unannounced, unless he was doing it for a specific effect. Nezu simply asked if Sir Nighteye was in his office. The staff seemed nervous but confirmed that he was and that he was free. Nezu walked straight in without waiting to be summoned. He knew they would call him, but by the time he reached the door, he wouldn't give Sir Nighteye time to prepare. When Nezu entered the office, he found Sir Nighteye and Lemillion. "Ah, Mr. Nighteye, the very man I've been looking for," Nezu said, and everyone could hear the poison in his voice. Sir Nighteye and Lemillion were confused about what was happening. "Welcome, Nezu, though I wonder why you're here. I'm willing to assume it has something to do with the email you sent about Midoriya being at Ua lately," the man asked as Nezu sat down in the chair. Lemillion stood up to leave, but Nezu wanted him to hear this. "Lemillion, stay, I think you deserve to hear this too," Nezu said with his smile. Lemillion looked at the man, who just nodded, confused. They were worried about Izuku. "Many things, but yes, this meeting is about Izuku. I'm here to deliver the paperwork that removes Izuku from your agency. There are many reasons behind this, but the primary one is due to a hostile work environment and his failure to fulfill his teaching responsibilities while working on a study basis," Nezu said without smiling. Lemillion and Sir Nighteye were surprised. Lemillion was confused by what Nezu said, but Sir Nighteye had a good idea of what Nezu meant. "You should have a pretty good idea why this is happening, Sir Nighteye. I must say, I'm disappointed in you. Furthermore, just wait until All Might shows up or calls you and starts yelling a lot. You brought Izuku to your agency for the sole purpose of dehumanizing and breaking him. UA has revoked your ability to apply for work placements at UA, and I've taken the liberty of banning you from other schools as well. This will last for a year, and we hope you learn your lesson," Nezu said. Lemillion tried to defend his boss, but Nezu blocked his path. "Lemillion, don't be foolish and think he didn't do it. I have ample proof that he did. The man had no intention of teaching him and wasted an entire semester of work study for Izuku. He learned a few things, but not to the level he should have. However, don't worry, as Izuku Midoriya, now known as the hero Apollo, is currently working under my supervision as a work-study student," Nezu said with a happy smile at that fact. Sir Nighteye was surprised since Nezu almost never does work studies. This means that Nezu has seen something that Sir Nighteye has not seen. "You almost never do work studies. What makes you good enough for that?" the man asked. Nezu just chuckled a little as he sipped his tea that seemed to appear out of nowhere. "Ah, well, you know you were attacking him for being peculiar and all that. Well, did you know he was hiding his strength and intelligence? His IQ is one of the highest I've ever seen in humans, and he's smarter than you. He's beaten me in many chess games lately. It's very entertaining," Nezu said. Mr. and Lemillion were confused. Why was Midoriya hiding his strength? They asked Nezu, and he was even more disappointed in both of them. He took out his phone and sent the presentation, telling them to watch it right then and there. They did. They turned pale at the end, since Nezu had just told them that Izuku had run out of ideas for his quirk, but Sir Nighteye knew the truth. He knew he hadn't even introduced himself. He had one for all and was now as smart as Nezu for the most part. That was a terrifying combination in Sir's mind. However, Lemillion was still confused as to why Sir had done what he did to Izuku. Izuku was an amazing hero and helped save Eri. Why did his boss do it? He asked, and Sir lowered his gaze in guilt. Sir explained that it was because of a problem between him and All Might that he took it out on Izuku. He explained how, after the raid to save Eri, he was planning to be better, but it seemed he missed his chance. Lemillion was disappointed in his boss, in his mentor, and left the room. Nezu sat down and glared at Sir Nighteye for the things he had done. Furthermore, the point about Izuku not having quirks was a mistake. Let's see who else doesn't have quirks. Ah, that's right, all the MIGHTIES. It was a random kid on the street who was found and chosen as the 8th, just like All Might found Izuku on the street and chose him as the 9th. It was the user's choice to find the next user while performing their hero duties. Not that someone was presented to them. Also, Mirio couldn't get one for all the way you wanted. The previous users refused to let Izuku go, Nezu declared. The man was surprised but then became confused by the last part and asked for more details. Ah, yes, did you know that Izuku has synchronized with One for All far better than any other user? He can talk to past users almost all the time when he goes to sleep. The One for All core loves Izuku so much, and the users themselves refuse to allow one for all to transfer from him unless he's dying or has found his protege far in the future. Therefore, your entire plan would never have worked. So what was the point of everything you did to Izuku? For nothing. Nezu said in a cold, venomous tone that was quite pronounced. Sir Nighteye was shocked by this new information. He now knew he had a very intelligent boy on his team, a boy who had lost 50% of the OFA's control and could communicate with users from the past. Sir Nighteye realized how badly he had messed up. Nezu soon left the office and returned to Ua. It was midday and classes were in progress. He had left Izuku at home and put him to work on an assignment he had given him. He also gave him some technology to get used to and start learning to code. Nezu was surprised when he returned and found all the work done and in code. The code was easy. I learned to write a lot of different codes when I was little to hide things from other students and teachers. I stopped when they just destroyed all my work anyway, not wanting to waste my time. However, now I don't have to worry about that. Izuku said that all his information was now on the computer where he could access it from multiple locations. Soon, Nezu and Izuku began developing a training plan to get his body in better condition. The goal was for him to reach 100% before the end of his third year. To achieve this, they would need to increase their training by 25% each year. The plan was based on the training program that previous users had given Izuku, and Nezu modified it to be more efficient, as it was already quite good and just needed fine-tuning. They also made plans for the hero classes. Izuku suggested working with Class 2B if Vlad King was willing, since they currently had 21 students because Shinso was in that class. Nezu thought this was a good suggestion and said that they would still have private lessons most of the time, but that Class 2B would be a good fit since he had seen the class's reactions. Some of them already knew the statistics about people without quirks, and many of them also faced greater discrimination, since some of their quirks were considered villainous or creepy, causing them to be bullied much more than those in 2A. Izuku was glad to know that he would be more accepted there. As they spoke, the students and teacher of Class 2A were feeling very down. They realized how important Izuku was to their class now that they had lost him. The class felt less motivated to do things in practice. Bakugo had returned to the class, and some were distant with him while others tried to stay connected to what they had learned. They didn't know everything, but they did know that he had interfered in Izuku's life. Bakugo refused to talk about it and said that he was going to get better and that, hopefully, one day he would apologize to Izuku. They noticed that he stopped calling him Deku or nerd or anything else. Izuku's closest friends, or former close friends, were hit the hardest. Iida, Uraraka, and Todoroki felt incredibly guilty about what they had said about the peculiars. They had turned against their friend so easily without even realizing it. Izuku had played a significant role in each of their lives, and they had so readily abandoned him. They tried to find him all over campus but had no luck. This was because Izuku had either stayed inside the new house or only used the tunnels to get around. Soon, word spread about Izuku's departure from Class 2A, and everyone wondered where he had gone. Everyone realized how gloomy Class 2A was, and no one wanted to mess with them. Not even Class 2B started doing anything about them. Soon another week passed, and someone finally spotted Izuku Midoriya, and the news spread like wildfire. He was seen in a hero class with 2B. Everyone was confused as to why he was with them and not 2A, since no one knew, except 2A, what had actually happened. The teachers knew but didn't talk about it. Nezu was truly terrifying when he made it clear they shouldn't speak up, as he made them attend training on bullying and discrimination. The reason was that they had messed up, but they should have noticed the signs between Bakugo and Izuku during their first year. However, let's get back to the hero training in Class 2A. The class was confused when they saw Nezu and Izuku Midoriya in the classroom. Some were about to call him by his old hero name, Deku, but Nezu spoke first. Let me introduce everyone to the only student in 2N, Izuku Midoriya, also known as the hero Apollo. He's no longer a member of 2A due to the discriminatory practices he faced from his former classmates and teacher. Though, they didn't really realize their views were wrong until after my presentation, Nezu said. Some were confused as to why that presentation was connected to Izuku, but some figured it out and paled. Wait, Midoriya, when did you get your quirk? Shinso asked, looking a little pale at his thoughts. Izuku was nervous. This was the moment of truth, and Vlad King and Nezu were watching very closely. I didn't get it until about 2 months before the entrance exam. So I've only had my quirk for over a year, almost a year and a half. Therefore, I was considered to have no quirks from age 4 until 2 months before the exams. Izuku declared nervously. The teachers watched their every reaction like hawks. They noticed everyone turning pale. Then Shinso approached Izuku, and everyone fell silent, stunned by what he was about to do. He lowered his head and apologized. I'm so sorry for the crap I said during the first sports festival. Oh my god, I'm so sorry, Shinso affirmed. Izuku was surprised, but simply picked Shinso up, hugged him, and told him he was okay. You're one of the only people who actually apologize for something they did. Besides, I never held it against you because I knew you had problems in your life because of your weirdness, and I had no way of knowing about my life. Next time, don't take people for granted, Shinso, Izuku said. Shinso simply told Izuku to call him by his first name, as he wanted to accept his offer of friendship if he was still open to it. Izuku just smiled, hugged him, and said yes. Nezu and Vlad King were pleased that 2B reacted this way. They knew that many of the students here faced some kind of discrimination because of their quirks and would be much more open to Izuku. That introduction was paying off handsomely right now. Monoma approached and hugged Izuku as well. I'm sorry those jerks from 2A were like that. Most of this class has faced some kind of discrimination because our quirks were considered villainous or weird, or too weak to be used for heroism, but we're all here to prove them wrong. Welcome to being an unofficial member of 2B even though you're from 2N, Monoma said, and Vlad was surprised by his student's quick change of heart. He thought he'd have to work with Monoma since Izuku came from 2A, but he was wrong. He was impressed with Monoma. Soon everyone got to work for the class and started training. This training was a combat class, a kind of tag game. Izuku was working with his teammate Hitoshi, whom he started calling simply Toshi, which made Hitoshi cough since no one had ever given him a nickname before. While working to capture other teams, Izuku displayed his true strength. He grabbed Toshi from behind and they took off. Izuku had already unlocked the Black Whip quirk last semester and had become very skilled with it. He used it to quickly cut through the training fields with Toshi on his back, and they soon found themselves close to several groups. They devised a plan that would trick many of them into reacting. Toshi would shout something a split second before Izuku would kick the ground. This would cause them to scream in response, which would trigger Toshi's quirk. They quickly sprang into action and put the plan into motion. The moment Izuku landed with a 50% kick, the ground shattered into so many pieces that everyone gasped in shock. Toshi had taken out nearly 80% of the teams in one fell swoop. Izuku went after those who hadn't fallen for the trap. He swiftly deployed his martial arts skills and eliminated the others in close combat with incredible speed, thanks to his 50% power, which none of them were used to. This allowed him and Toshi to finish the round completely. Everyone was amazed. Toshi himself was surprised that everything had gone so smoothly. The only reason it went so well is that they weren't used to seeing me use so much power. I made a huge hole in the ground that surprised them. If you're not used to seeing someone do something they haven't done before, you're shocked. However, it won't work a second time, Izuku said. Toshi could only agree because he was shocked too, but he knew he would wait for him in the future. When the round was over, the two were called out and everyone else was allowed to do another round since it hadn't lasted that long. Toshi and Izuku sat down in the control room. Hey Izuku, do you think you'll forgive your former classmates? Toshi asked. Vlad and Nezu listened because they wanted to know too. Izuku was silent for a few moments, but then he spoke. I don't think I'll do it anytime soon. I don't think I can be friends again that easily. I had to live with all of that my whole life, and then I found out they shared similar views. It hurt so much. I know they didn't know it, but still, I did so much for them. I saved so many of them from death or from their own actions that could have caused their deaths, and finding out that's what they thought hurt so much. Maybe I will someday, but I doubt it will be before I graduate from UA. I want to broaden my social circle, and I think I'm going to like 2B. They've already been so accepted and know so much about life's hardships. I met some people in 2A who do know about life's hardships, but they still held the same views as everyone else, and that hurt. Izuku said. Vlad and Nezu had expected this outcome. Nezu was going to get Izuku professional help soon, when his therapist friend came to town. He brought them along because they were looking for a new city to settle in, as most of their older patients had passed away and he didn't take on new patients as often since he gave many lectures at schools. Third person POV. A few more weeks passed, and word spread that Izuku was now the principal's personal student. It was also rumored that he was in a special class called 2N, the principal's private class just for his personal students. Everyone was shocked by this. However, Izuku didn't let anything stop him. He never stopped training, doing the toughest jobs Nezu assigned him, and spending more and more time with 2B. The fact that he was spending so much time with 2B also became known, and people wondered what 2A had done to lure the resident sun boy away. However, no one spoke about it. Izuku was having a great time with Nezu. Nezu had been teaching him how to manipulate the media and use it for his own purposes. Izuku was enjoying this because it would help him with his future plans to change the laws to better protect people. He even started campaigning against his old schools and was preparing to hit them with lawsuits and criminal charges. It turns out that some very old laws still protect children without quirks. These laws were forgotten in the books because they weren't used much. These laws were temporary laws put in place before the other laws were implemented during the quirk boom. The wording of the law establishes quirk status, and it was in that wording that they allowed them to hit the schools since the lack of a quirk was considered quirk status in the eyes of the government. Izuku and Nezu laughed heartily when they discovered that old law the legislators had forgotten to repeal. They checked it several times, and it was still in effect to this day, never repealed by any other law. So, they started their plans, but slowed down a bit so Izuku could train for the sports festival. Nezu was getting Izuku into all sorts of different situations and had him doing fieldwork as well. Izuku subjected himself to grueling training at his own request. Every day he returned home exhausted and worn out. This went on for weeks until a few days before the festival. To what extent have you increased your control? Nezu asked. Izuku felt OFA and answered. I've taken it up to 55%, which is a decent increase for only being 2 months into the second half of the year. Izuku declared, and Nezu had to agree that it was decent progress. If Izuku could maintain that speed, he would reach 100% well before graduation, but they had to be careful not to ruin his body. Therefore, Izuku left Nezu, who told him to go meet 2B in their waiting room. Izuku ran off and went to meet them. He found them, and they all welcomed him into the room. Soon it was time to start the festival. As everyone was being called up, his former classmates noticed him and tried to call out to him, but Izuku either ignored them or got distracted by the students of 2B and Toshi, who kept his attention on them instead of 2A. It was clear he was nervous. The student representative, who was the highest achieving student this year instead of the entrance exam, was called up. The first round was another obstacle course. All the students prepared to start, and Izuku was at the front, ready to go. Some of the 2A students started pushing their way toward him, but the starting pistol fired. Izuku burst onto the starting line with lightning speed. Everyone except 2A, Vlad King, and Nezu was amazed by his speed. He was going at 55% and moving so fast that people started comparing him to All Might in the stadium. By the time the students reached the first obstacle, Izuku was already at the third, which was the last one. He had smashed through the robots at the first obstacle, jumped over the entire pit, and was now on the landmines, simply running over them since he was faster than they could explode. Izuku had reached the end of the obstacle course when everyone else had only just reached the pit. The crowd went wild. First place goes to our hero in training Apollo. He's Nezu's private student and the only student in Nezu's private class 2N. Present Mike shouted. Nezu wanted him to use Izuku's new hero name, as they wanted to make it public, since Izuku was aiming to win this year. They wanted to assure the public that there was a new rising symbol who would protect them from villains. Everyone else returned to the stadium after about 15 minutes, and the students from 2B swarmed Izuku when they got back and talked about how fast he had gone. Were you faster than in our last training session? Toshi asked, and Izuku confirmed that his strength had increased by 5%. The students of 2A tried again to walk towards Izuku, but Nezu had Midnight start talking for the next round. I'm not going to let them get near him so easily, Nezu thought. Aizawa looked at Nezu as he told Midnight to start the next round. Are you trying to prevent 2A from getting close to Midoriya? He asked Nezu, but he didn't answer. How can we compensate him if he prevents us from doing so? Aizawa thought he still felt guilty. All Might simply didn't get involved. He knew he was still Izuku's mentor, but he knew he should take a backseat in the boys' training and let Nezu and the past users lead him for the time being, since he had been so ignorant of the boys' problems. He made sure to offer his help during physical training and with any techniques he knew, which Izuku had accepted several times, which helped, but he knew the relationship was still strained and would likely remain so for some time. He knew he had to take things slowly and not rush into anything. All Might also remembered receiving a hard slap from Inko Midoriya when he was told that Nezu had informed on her. She slapped him very hard, and he was sure he felt her use her quirk on his groin, since that area hurt a little when she spoke. The second round was soon announced. It was going to be a point capture round. However, there were no teams in this round. Although they never said teamwork wasn't allowed, Izuku gestured to the students of 2B to form teams, and they agreed. 2B wanted to spare 2A from this fight, and Izuku didn't even know they had planned to target them from the start. When the round began, Izuku got going and targeted most of the students in his class and a few others from 2A. However, he noticed that 2B was going all out against 2A. Everyone was fighting. As the round progressed, Izuku realized that most of the other students in his class had run out of points and had given up and left the ring, knowing they couldn't win. Therefore, he turned his attention to 2A. He didn't want to target anyone in 2B since only 16 students could advance to the final round. So, he got to work. Izuku used the black whip to score the most points as he swept through the 2A students. His control of it had improved since working with Shiozaki on how he moved his vines. It wasn't direct training, but it gave him enough information to base his own training on, which helped him. Thus, he was able to apply fine control of the whip and grab the headbands. Some students, like Todoroki, tried to freeze the black whip coming toward them, but Izuku used One for All to power it up, making it stronger and breaking the ice with ease. Izuku wasn't holding back. He wasn't following the rules of his past. He wasn't Deku anymore. He was Apollo. The round was soon called, and the results were in. No one from 2A advanced to the next round. Not a single one of them. Izuku had targeted Todoroki and Bakugo with his black whip for the most part, as they were the ones who would give 2B the most trouble. Some of the 2A students retained many of their points, but 2B had many more, allowing them to advance to the next round. Bakugo, Todoroki, Tokiyami, Iida, and Kirishima had all lost their points to Izuku, who thought they would be the biggest challenge for 2B. Thus, the students who advanced to the final round were Izuku, Tetsu, Monoma, Kendo, Kuroryo, Shiozaki, Shishida, Shota, Tsunotori, Tokage, Fukidashi, Honanuki, Bondo, Saburaba, Kodai, and Awase. All 16 of their students performed in the final round. The teachers in the staff room were surprised by the result. Nezu and Vlad King were laughing. Nezu found the situation very funny. It seems like a drastic change compared to last year, when most of the students were from 1A, this year they are all from 2B with only one student from 2N. Nezu declared as he sipped his tea with a smile on his face. Vlad King wore a smug look on his face. Aizawa was annoyed by Vlad King's expression, but he couldn't say anything. The students of 2A left the stage and headed to their seats. The students of 2B simply celebrated amongst themselves and pulled Izuku into a group hug. The class always made him feel welcome, and the whole class always talked to him. It was more like a family than the small cliques that 2A had. Then they heard Midnight announce the final round, which was the traditional round of the tournament. Overall, this round passed quickly for the most part. The matches were explosive and large, but they were short, as the students aimed to defeat their opponent immediately without delay. Izuku simply used his aerial force strikes to force his opponents out of the ring each time. He had to put in a good effort against Shiozaki when she planted her vines in the ground, but he only managed to kick them and break the arena, then knocked her out with a punch. Smentos just glared at Izuku for the destruction he had caused and muttered that he had done too much damage. Izuku just rubbed his neck and apologized. Soon it was time for the final round. It was between Monoma and Izuku. Toshi had placed third, but he had lost because Monoma used many quirks, such as Tetsu and Kendo quirks, to defeat him in close combat. "Let's do this, Izuku!" Monoma screamed. He used Kendo's quirk, Shiehassaiki's quirk, and Toshi's quirk. The moment Izuku responded, he was trapped in the quirk. However, just like in the first year, the past users broke the hold, as they would always protect the current user of mental quirks as best they could. Now, remember that mental quirks don't work that well. Only for a few seconds, unless it's a really strong one that can't be broken. Izuku shouted as he ran towards Monoma, who paled at the news. He'd forgotten that Izuku had broken free in his first year. Izuku closed the distance and the fight began. He wanted to put on a show for the crowd and countered all of Monoma's blows, gradually forcing him out of the ring. Winner Apollo. A round of applause for the winner of the second-year sports festival, the hero in training known as Apollo. The announcer shouted. Everyone applauded his display of strength. They chanted his hero name loudly. Izuku was overjoyed. He was so happy to have gained so much control over OFA and the Black Whip. Most people couldn't handle more than 40% of All Might's power, according to him. Izuku was told that All Might used a higher percentage for movement, but in combat, he hovered between 20% and 30% most of the time and rarely reached 40%. The only time All Might used 100% outside of moves was when he wanted to create a massive gust of wind to change the weather, like when he performed a Detroit smash against the sludge villain. He did it to create rain to extinguish the fires, and the sludge villain couldn't be killed by the attack either, unlike someone with a physical body who would have suffered numerous broken bones and faced a high risk of death. Izuku used most of his 55% to kick the ground or create a gust of wind. When he punches, it usually drops to 15% or 25%, unless the enemy has a body that can withstand the blows. Izuku, Monoma, and Toshi stood on the stage as All Might entered his slim form and provided them with a medal. Then he turned and looked at the cameras. Last year we saw a completely different group of students on this stage. This year, we have different victories. As I said last time, anyone can step onto this stage with training and determination. So, always go further and plus ultra. He shouted and everyone shouted plus ultra too. Izuku and 2B headed to 2B's classroom to relax, as Nezu said he needed to finish some things before wanting to talk to him. How many of you are currently working on studies? Izuku asked them and only half the class was doing one. Hopefully the rest can get one after the performance, Izuku stated. Toshi entered through the door and warned Izuku that Class 2A was coming down the hall. Izuku jumped onto the roof and entered the hidden tunnels, where he hid. He didn't want to talk to them yet. He was enjoying his time there. So, he hid on the roof and waited for them to leave. Izuku could hear them asking if he was in the room and telling Class 2A that he had already left. After some grumbling, Class 2A departed. Izuku plopped down and thanked them. Third person POV. The first half of their second year has passed. Izuku and Nezu have been creating a great deal of chaos around Japan. News story after news story. Manipulating politicians and other government officials with a dash of blackmail thrown in. Soon, Izuku and Nezu took their former schools to court and won. All the staff involved were arrested. Many of their former classmates were arrested as well. The charges against them were minor because the teachers encouraged it, but they all had to do a lot of work to keep the charges off their records. After the schools were attended to and sparks of fire were ignited, Nezu and Izuku decided to make the flame even bigger. People don't care about children without features, but they do care about children with features. As such, they manipulated that emotion. They pushed articles like, "How dare these teachers harm children? The lives of rare and unusual children are being destroyed by the teachers' negligence. Are they turning children into villains?" They kept different stories coming out all the time. They focused on how adults were failing children with quirky characteristics, but also those without. This way, people would agree more quickly. They kept the fire burning until they were able to pressure the government to demand changes to discrimination laws to include children without quirky characteristics. Their argument was that if teachers allow even a child without peculiarities to be neglected, how can parents be sure they aren't neglecting other children and jeopardizing their future? So, after a semester of doing this, they were able to get several laws passed requiring stricter protection against discrimination for children without peculiarities. It wasn't ideal, since the laws were new and there wasn't much chance they'd be enforced, but it was a start. The enactment of laws lays the groundwork for future changes. Class 2B noticed Izuku seemed happier and asked him about it. Izuku explained what he and Nezu were doing, and the class was amazed at how quickly they'd accomplished these things. It had only taken Nezu and Izuku one semester to get new laws passed and spark a public outcry. They were a little scared of what the villains would face if they ever angered him. Izuku had spent the winter break training and hanging out with Class 2B. He was getting closer and closer to the class and felt right at home with them. Even though he wasn't officially a member, they didn't mind and always included him when they introduced themselves. Nezu was really impressed with Class 2B and even offered them help with studying and training plans if they wanted it. He didn't offer this to Class 2A since they hadn't done anything to impress him. All of Class 2B was also doing work studies now, while only half of Class 2A was. They all started training together, and Izuku was putting his hero analysis into practice with his new friends. He was throwing out new ideas for them to try, and they had discovered a way for Monoma to maintain his quirks almost 24 hours a day while he was a hero. It involved rings with a small hole at the bottom. These rings allowed him to carry DNA blocks from people willing to donate their DNA, enabling him to copy their quirks and switch between them. According to the support department that created them, these DNA blocks would last between 3 and 4 months before the DNA became unusable. Therefore, Monoma began training to use certain quirks to become more proficient with them and was taking his abilities to the next level. While all this was happening, Izuku learned that he had obtained a new quirk. It was the 7th user's quirk. Izuku now had OFA, Black Whip, and Float as quirks. Izuku decided to cause chaos. One morning, Izuku was waiting in the teacher's lounge. The moment all the staff had entered the room, with Nezu also in the room, who knew what he was doing, Izuku just started to speak. Nezu. I'm stuck again. Izuku, he said. Everyone jumped out of their seats at the sound of his voice. They all looked to see where it was coming from and found him floating. All Might tensed at the sight of his protege. He was witnessing his master's strangeness again. Then Izuku let himself fall before Eraserhead could deactivate his quirk. It doesn't matter. See you later, Izuku said as he ran out the door. Nezu just started laughing at All Might's face. Izuku continued using his quirk to scare people throughout the day, appearing from the ceiling and floating down in front of them without them noticing. He caused many to have heart attacks, and Nezu enjoyed the chaos. One such moment was when a student from 2B asked a question to those around him, and Izuku simply answered them. Everyone tensed up and screamed when they saw him. They were terrified because he was just floating there. My new quirk. I activated it over the weekend and I've been practicing. I can currently float up and down, but I need to practice more to use it in combat. Izuku said. Tokage offered to help him train, since she can fly using parts of her body when she uses her quirk. Izuku was happy about it and accepted. Izuku, I need to start teaching, but good job scaring the staff. Vlad King said as he entered. Izuku just laughed, and Vlad King realized that it was starting to sound like Nezu's laugh. Oh my god, no. Vlad King thought. Even the rest of the staff passing by groaned when they heard Izuku. Now there are 2 of them. They thought. Izuku traveled through the tunnels and found Nezu's office and dropped in. Hi, Dad, Izuku shouted while laughing. They played a game of chess while Nezu asked random questions that Izuku needed to learn. Most of his education classes were spent with Nezu verbally teaching Izuku while they played chess, since Izuku was able to keep up. They both enjoyed it so much that they refused to stop. All Might soon arrived and wanted to know about the new quirk. Ah, yes, Nana gave me her quirk. She said it was time to activate the next one since my power has increased the most. The OFA Corps forced them to draw another one, and they chose to give me this one since it would fit with my current style that I've been using, Izuku said. It was true that if he used the flotation technique with the Black Whip and OFA, he could move quickly and be very agile. Soon All Might left after getting the answers he needed. Nezu and Izuku returned to their plans. They were planning to slowly take down the #1 hero. They wanted to tarnish his reputation gradually so it wouldn't affect hero society as a whole. They were also working on finding the League of Villains, as they theorized that Dabi was Tuya Todoroki and wanted to help him if they could. The problem was that finding the League would be difficult since they had kept a low profile since All for One's defeat. Nezu and Izuku didn't think they could give up, even if others thought they should. Therefore, they kept their ears open for any clues about their whereabouts. In other news, they discussed other plans they had. It was also related to the #1 hero. They decided they would make some plans for world domination. They talked about plans and saving people. Yes, saving people and not destroying the Hero Commission so they could rebuild it better while controlling it. They would never do that. Therefore, they needed to find a way to put better controls in place to prevent heroes like Endeavor from being created in the future because he was just a villain with a hero license. This may or may not involve some blackmail and public manipulation by leaking some minor crimes by Hero Commission officials and some shady deals they've made. They were also looking to save Hawks since they had discovered that he was more or less bought as a child by the Hero Commission and was being forced to be a spy in the League of Villains. This meant that the Commission knew the League's location and wasn't doing anything about it. This annoyed Izuku and Nezu since they had to stop the League. Therefore, they gathered information and continued making plans. Third-person Pav. It was now the second semester of his second year. Izuku and Class 2B had been making waves in the public eye. The group had been undertaking missions together at Nezu's request, who had his student workers team up for various missions. The idea behind this was to push 2B into the public eye at a faster pace than 2A. Nezu wanted 2B to be seen as the top heroes and recognized as the future, rather than 2A as it had been in the past. This was because Nezu hadn't seen much change in 2A. He had kept up with them, and they seemed eager to talk to Izuku, but they never made enough of an effort after the few attempts he made to block them. He was somewhat disappointed in them. Was their friendship with him so weak that they couldn't overcome the challenges he presented? Nezu thought. Nezu realized that Bakugo had improved and had written a letter to Izuku. He had given it to Nezu to deliver, since Bakugo wasn't sure if Izuku wanted to talk to him face to face and wanted to put the ball in Izuku's court and let him decide how to proceed. Nezu was pleased with the improvement Bakugo was showing. Nezu had delivered the letter to Izuku as requested and read it with him. Bakugo told Izuku he couldn't apologize yet, as he needed to be better before he could be 100% sure it was true and not false. Izuku and Nezu agreed to this approach, and Izuku responded with a letter saying they could communicate this way. He also mentioned that he doubted they could be friends like they were anytime soon, but that they could be a little more than acquaintances for now, as it would take Izuku a long time to be ready for anything more. Izuku mentioned that he was disappointed the class didn't make more of an effort to talk to him and that it showed they didn't really care about friendship since they couldn't overcome Nezu's pathetic attempts to block them. Izuku was glad that Bakugo was doing what he was doing, but Izuku said that he no longer considered the others as friends and only saw them as schoolmates. He hoped that Bakugo would continue working to improve and looked forward to the day when they could work side by side fighting villains without any problems between them. Nezu was pleased with this outcome. He was disappointed with the students of Class 2A, but he was happy about Bakugo's situation. He knew Izuku always held out hope for his brother's return, but said otherwise. Perhaps it would take several years before they reached a higher stage, beyond being acquaintances, and a true friendship again, but Nezu hoped it would work, even though Bakugo was one of Izuku's tormentors. Although Izuku didn't need to know that Nezu had many plans to kill Bakugo if he messed up again. That was a fact neither Bakugo nor Izuku needed to know. As the students entered the middle of the semester and headed towards the end, they received news about the League of Villains. Some of the villains were spotted in a remote area of Japan living their lives. Nezu and Izuku were skeptical at first, but reports show they haven't done anything wrong. Have they really given up? Nezu and Izuku thought to themselves, what are you waiting for? So they made some plans to explore the area and find out the truth. That's how they ended up in a village in rural Japan. Only Nezu and Izuku arrived at the scene. The reason for this was that they didn't want to alarm the League, and the reports they received didn't indicate that the League of Victims was there. The reports provided descriptions of people who had given statements in the police report about a villain who attacked a woman, whom they apprehended. They hadn't used quirks at all, but rather physically stopped the assault. Therefore, the police didn't press the issue. However, the descriptions matched some possible disguises that Nezu and Izuku figured would be easy to change. One of these was having Tuya return to his old hair color and use makeup to cover his scars. This is how they found Dabi, which led them to the others. Nezu and Izuku weren't afraid of being trapped or taken hostage, since Izuku had discovered his float quirk and, with One for All and the Black Whip, was very strong and could get them out of there quickly. They were hiding in the woods near the house where the police report said the villagers lived. The village didn't have many houses, and the police were spread out among several villages since it was rural. Most of the land was farmland, and they had seen the person working in the fields twice. The person wasn't an exact match, but he fit one of the possible appearances the League members had created that they could have changed. They waited until nightfall and approached the house. As they drew nearer the building, they listened to the conversations inside, and what they discovered was unsettling. The League members hadn't wanted to do what they had done. The League was discussing what to do with their lives since All for One had ruined their current lives through a mind control quirk. All for One had them brought before him and used a quirk directly on them that altered their thoughts, forcing them to follow his commands while transforming them into darker versions of themselves. He had found them shortly after they landed on the streets and had ample time to manipulate their quirks to make them seem completely real. However, they hadn't wanted to do what they were doing. This changed many of their plans. Nezu and Izuku went off into the forest to talk and decide what they wanted to do. They continue to commit crimes, but they don't have true control over their bodies, and the laws protect them as well. The problem is public protest, Izuku stated. Nezu simply agreed with that statement. We need to find out if they're telling the truth. We need them to turn themselves in so the detective can question them before we bring them in. If they're truthful, the law protects them and the government can't imprison them. It would be a matter of creating new identities for them, Izuku said, and then he had an idea. What if the League were executed? Then new lives would be created for them. Chuya Todoroki could be brought back to life, but that would cause problems with Endeavor. Shigaraki could revert to his Shimura identity since his past isn't public knowledge. The others could change their appearance. If we find someone with a quirk that changes their hair or other similar quirks, we could completely alter their appearance, Izuku suggested. Nezu liked how this plan was coming along, but it all depended on them truly being innocent. Therefore, they had no choice but to confront the potential villains. What are our chances of winning if this turns into a fight? Nezu asked. Izuku wasn't sure, since it would be him against all of them. Nezu couldn't really fight. He could contribute some fighting ability, but one hit from Dabi and he'd be dead. 50-50. If it turns into a fight, you have to run into the woods and leave me behind if we can't grab each other and run. If you get caught in the fight, any blow could kill you because of the scale of attacks that will come from me, Dabi, Shigaraki, or the others. We'll meet at the hotel we rented an hour after the fight. Don't go inside, but stay in the area. If I don't return, then you must flee, Izuku said. It was a good idea for Nezu to have Izuku's outfit changed so it would be better. It appears in the translation, I didn't choose it. Izuku activated his dark mode and approached with Nezu on his shoulder. They were taking a big risk here. They approached the house and knocked on the door. A few seconds later, the door opened, and Shigaraki should have been there. His eyes widened, and he was about to close the door and run when Izuku called after him. Stop. I'm not here to fight, Izuku said. He froze and stared at Izuku. Then the other members approached, their eyes widening, and they looked like they wanted to run away. Izuku kept his hands raised the whole time. We've located you, but we overheard some of you talking while we were eavesdropping at the house. We just want to talk and confirm what we've heard about AFO manipulating you with a quirk. If it's true, you could get away with all of this, but we need to talk, and you have to surrender to Nezu and me if it's true. If you want any chance of getting away with this, don't run towards us and let us talk, Izuku affirmed. They tensed and stared at each other. Shigaraki looked into Izuku's eyes, took a step back, and gestured for them to enter. The other members were surprised but followed Shigaraki into the living room. So they all found themselves sitting together in the living room. Now, the detective with a lie detector quirk is coming to this town. He's not bringing anyone with him, and he doesn't know why we called him. We want him to verify your stories. If you actually committed everything under AFO's quirk, then the law protects you. We need to know if you committed any crimes before being found by AFO and what you did. You would have to be punished for those crimes, but nothing after AFO if you did it under her quirk, Nezu stated. The league still seemed tense and didn't really know what to do until Shigaraki spoke. I know that for all of us, we haven't committed any truly major crimes since we left. We stole some food and things afterward to survive, but we found our way here where we were able to buy this land with some money we took from AFO's things. As for the crimes before AFO, he found me when my quirk activated at a young age and killed my family, so everything for me was under his control. Shigaraki stated. Nezu and Izuku began writing notes for the detective to interrogate them. Soon the other members began to talk. None of them committed crimes after the AFO, aside from some petty theft for food and clothing. That was very good since that could be handled very easily. Dabi was confirmed as Tsuya Todoroki. He was asked if he would help them eventually take down his father. We're working little by little to take him down without destroying the current society. The idea is that by the time 2B and I graduate and have about a year in the field, we'll be able to support the system and easily call him out for his crimes and get quick support to have him arrested. Izuku said, and everyone asked why 2B and not 2A since he is a member of 2A. Then they explained Izuku's past and what happened. It was ironic that Izuku felt more accepted by these villains than by his old class. They returned to the clue and learned that the members had only committed minor offenses before the AFO. There were no murders or major crimes. Theft, property damage, and a few other actions. However, nothing they couldn't get the government to ignore. They soon finished talking, and the detective arrived at the address. Nezu went to welcome him inside and was startled the moment he entered the room. What the hell did you do with Nezu and Izuku? I knew it was a bad idea when you took them under your eye. I knew they were planning world domination. Hey, shouted the detective, who was freaking out. The villains were confused but scared of Nezu and Izuku when the officer spoke of world domination. Had they been sitting with the real villains all this time? They calmed the detective down and explained everything, and he was tired. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. The detective looks good, Izuku said while drinking tea. God, I hate them both. He shouted back. They learned a lot when the detective interrogated the members. They also found out that Kurogiri was a former UA student. His real name was Oboro Shirakumo, alias Loud Cloud. They were soon able to confirm that they hadn't committed any major crimes that couldn't be resolved with minor punishments and that everything they did while under AFO's command was due to a whim and they were protected by the law. Well, I think Izuku's idea of disbanding the league and granting everyone new lives is the best idea. I know it's lying to the public, but the public won't let them go if the league isn't punished. We can also change their appearances using quirks the police have for undercover work. The effects are permanent and can be reversed with their quirks. The problem is seeing if it works with Oboro Shirakumo. He's the main problem with going undercover. The detective stated. That was until Shirakumo spoke. Actually, I can leave this form. I just don't because it feels strange since no one here knows about it. I discovered this once I was freed from the quirk's control. Even though I'm a Nomu now, I still have my basic human form. He confirmed, and we discovered, that he could still use the warp gates, but they were blue instead of purple. Therefore, he would revert to being Oboro Shirakumo, Shigaraki would return to his former identity, and Dabi, Toga, Twice, and Mr. Compress would receive new identities and have their appearances altered through quirks. The other league members had died during the fight with Overhaul. Thus, Spinner and Magna were dead. Moonfish and Mustard were career criminals before encountering AFO and were already in prison and would not be released. They already had life sentences outside of their actions during their time with the league. As such, there was no point in trying to do anything for them, and the league accepted this. Third-person POV. Izuku and Nezu had worked hard and reached an agreement. They had the former league members detained on the school campus in a building Nezu had hastily constructed before his return. The members were required to remain in the building, which was monitored by cameras. Nezu warned them that until the agreement with the government and the police was finalized, any attempt to leave the building would be reckless. Izuku asked them to trust that they would complete the deal as soon as possible, but cautioned that it could take the rest of the semester, as it was a large-scale agreement and many within the government would be unhappy. However, he insisted that they would ultimately have to accept it. During summer vacation, the deal was finally struck. The members would be arrested and sent to Tartarus to be imprisoned, where they would get into fights with other inmates and die from their injuries. This would be reported about 2 months after they were captured, so as not to raise public questions about why they all died so quickly. It would be announced that Apollo and Principal Nezu were responsible for capturing the League members and that they had the police as backup during the arrests. The former League members would have to remain on the UA campus for the remainder of the year until Apollo graduated. The government believed this time would be enough for the public to begin forgetting the League's faces. They would also join a special class to receive education during this year and thus prepare them to reintegrate into society. This class would be run by Nezu and would consist of students with some individual attention, but not to the same degree as Izuku, as the class's objective was to prepare them for their new lives. Izuku told them he would offer them jobs at his agency in the future if they wanted them. Nezu also offered to find them jobs on the UA campus after the year was over if they didn't want to work at the agency or didn't want an outdoor job or something similar. The former members were very grateful and started looking forward to the year passing. A week later, the news broke, and the League members changed their appearance. Twice had made clones of everyone so the police could arrest them publicly. This way, no one could deny that the League of Villains had indeed entered prison. Izuku had to work with Twice to create clones of himself, as he struggled with the real versus clone problem. He devised a way to circumvent it by adding a bow to his arm and having Twice close his eyes to create a clone. However, the bow was a different color than he had imagined, resulting in a clone with one less detail. This revealed who was real and who was a clone. This helped him overcome his problem, and he was able to create clones of himself and everyone else so the clones could be arrested and taken to prison on camera. With their disguised appearances, the members could now walk around campus undetected. They were also given uniforms to help them blend in. However, they said they would only stay near their building, which was located in the forest area, where Nezu and Izuku lived. They didn't want to risk being discovered anytime soon. After everything was over, it was time for classes to start again. Izuku knew he would be asked a lot of questions about the League, and he knew he wouldn't tell the whole truth. Not even the staff had received the full details of the situation. Only the retrieval girl was given the complete information in case of a medical emergency. League members were told that if a teacher asked who they were, they should simply show their IDs, which they were required to carry 24/7, to the teacher, who would then show them Nezu's information and details for the questioning. The teachers should stop asking questions after seeing the IDs and speaking with him, as he would decide how much to tell them. When Izuku entered the school, everyone stared at him. He could hear people talking about how he would take down the League and end the threat to their school. Izuku was glad that they felt safe again. He was also glad that the League was being helped instead of the book being thrown at them. He wouldn't be able to feel good about himself if that happened. He decided to go check on the students of Class 3B. He entered the classroom, and they all stared at him. "Seriously, you and Nezu captured the entire League?" Toshi asked, who only gave him a look of, "How crazy are you?" "Really, we had to make a lot of plans to find them. We only found them because of luck in our plans to find their location. They had changed their appearance a bit and lived in a remote rural town that had very few police patrols," Izuku affirmed. The class simply congratulated him, and Izuku prepared to leave until the door opened, and there was Class 3A. They had come to ask for Izuku and had found him. "Hello," Izuku spoke while feeling a little tense. The students of Class 3A were shocked to have found him. Soon Nezu came over the PA system and called him to his office. Izuku walked out the door and walked away without another word, since they hadn't said anything. It was really awkward. Then they started calling for him, but he was already in the hallway and had jumped into a nearby tunnel. The class came along the hallway and didn't see him. Soon Izuku arrived at Nezu's office, and they began making plans for the semester and for his future agency. All Might had offered him his old agency, but it was currently operating as a charity, and Izuku didn't want to give it up. Therefore, Izuku was going to create his own. While they were talking, Nezu mentioned that the new Big Three would be announced to the third-year students. Izuku guessed that he was one of the Big Three. He thought Bakugo and Todoroki would be the others. But he also knew that someone like Monoma, after all his training with the ideas Izuku had given him for rings and other support equipment, was very strong. He had even defeated Todoroki a few times in training. He had some trouble with Bakugo, but he was able to handle him too. The other students in Class 3B were all strong and could fight and take on most of Class 3A and win. However, Bakugo and Todoroki were difficult for most of the class unless they worked together. Class 3B improved significantly after Izuku and Nezu's advice. Toshi was another person Izuku thought could be among the top 3 because he was powerful both with and without his quirk. Quirkless fights most of Class 3A and wins due to all his training and his unwavering reliance on his quirks, which never wavered despite having a quirkless teacher, something Izuku found ironic. With quirks and the ability to plan, he could win as well, since he became adept at tricks and ambushes. Without time to plan, he would struggle against Bakugo and Todoroki, but he could defeat most of Class 3A, aside from those two. Therefore, a school-wide assembly was called, and the announcement of the Big Three was to take place. Izuku really didn't want to be with anyone from Class 3A if he was in the Big Three since they worked together a lot. Nezu went up on stage and began to speak. Hello everyone, and welcome back to UA. For some of you, this is the start of your senior year. For some, this is the beginning of your time here at UA. Today, we're announcing the new UA Big Three. Big Three doesn't mean they're the most powerful. It means these individuals are strong, intelligent, and capable of turning the tide of battles and influencing them. If you look back, none of the previous Big Three from the past 2 years have even won a single sports festival. So, it doesn't matter if they win every time. Nezu stated. People applauded and whispered who they thought would be in the Big Three. Now, without further ado, let's talk about the new Big Three. The first person to have earned a place as a member of the Big Three with my and the staff's approval is Hitoshi Shinso. Nezu said. The students were surprised. Class 3A was surprised. Class 3B was shocked. Izuku was excited. Soon Toshi was on the stage and was still in shock. Nezu then moved on to the next person. The next person approved by the staff as a member of the Big Three is Izuku Midoriya, aka Apollo. Nezu declared. Izuku was happy to be part of the Big Three alongside Toshi. They had become very good friends and hung out a lot outside of class and also went to cat cafes. They enjoyed the cats and their dark souls. Now, the last member of the Big Three is Nito Monoma, Nezu announced. Everyone applauded, and Class 3A was silent in surprise. Class 3B was shouting like crazy, yelling, "Good job!" to their classmates. 2 members of Class 3B and Izuku, who was an unofficial member of Class 3B, had gotten a perfect 3. Izuku could see Vlad King simply looking at Eraserhead with a satisfied expression. Eraserhead just glared at him with contempt. Now remember, being in the Big Three doesn't mean having the strongest quirk all the time. It means they can make a huge impact on battles. Shinso, with his underground hero skills, can be unmatched in quirkless fighting and tricking enemies into falling under his quirk. Monoma can wield many quirks and has become a wrecking ball of different fighting styles and battle strategies, supporting the battlefield on many fronts. Midoriya, who is a powerful fighter but also very intelligent, can control the flow of battle through tactics and battle plans, controlling how his opponents act and react to ensure the heroes win. These 3 are the new Big Three of UA, Nezu affirmed as everyone applauded. The assembly soon ended, and everyone returned to their classes. Izuku decided to go with Class 3B and enjoy his first day with them, since Nezu had a lot to do that day, being the first day. Vlad King had planned to just review a few things and give the class a day off, as the teachers were still preparing. Izuku was chatting with his friends from Class 3B, and they were talking about how all the Big Three came from Class 3B. Izuku wanted to say he was from Class 3N, but Monoma simply put his hand over Izuku's mouth, preventing him from speaking, which made everyone laugh. Remember, you're an unofficial member of 3B. As such, you count as 3B. Monoma said, leaving no room for debate. Okay, Izuku murmured through his hand. Soon the first day of class came to an end, and now they were looking forward to getting their hero licenses closer to the end of the year. Third person POV. Izuku and 3B were training together. Izuku had reached 85% quirk control and only needed to achieve the remaining 15% by the end of the year. The group of friends was working on team strategies, as most of them planned to join similar agencies together. Izuku had asked Toshi if he wanted to start an agency with him. Toshi would run the underground division while Izuku ran the surface division, allowing the agency to operate around the clock. Toshi agreed to the idea, as he enjoyed spending time with Izuku. Monoma overheard the conversation and asked if he could join them. Izuku had no problem with it, nor did Toshi. The three got along quite well, and with the ideas Izuku and Nezu had been providing, they both became powerful in their own right, which allowed them to join the Big Three alongside Izuku. Soon the third-year sports festival arrived. Many from Class 3B made it to the final round again. This year, Bakugo had also reached the final rounds and had placed third. Izuku had once again placed first, just like in second year, and Monoma had placed second. Toshi had placed fourth, having been defeated by Bakugo, who knew he shouldn't respond. He simply unleashed large explosions, forcing Toshi off the stage. Monoma was able to withstand them, having trained extensively with his Tetsu quirk, which allowed him to endure explosions. He also used his Kendo quirk to knock Bakugo out of the ring. Izuku continued working under Nezu's supervision for his work-study program, but he also patrolled on his own or with one of the agencies of the 3B members with whom Nezu regularly partnered on any case they had. He reached an agreement to do this and assist with their cases if they allowed Izuku to patrol with them and work with their studies, so he would have a backup if something went wrong, since he was still a student. The other agencies agreed, as they would accept Izuku regardless, but they also had Nezu on their cases, which made things much easier. The former members of the League were studying hard to prepare for their return to society. They had all accepted Izuku's offer to work at his agency once it was established and he could afford to hire them all. Nezu and Izuku introduced Class 3B to the League members after they agreed to keep quiet. The class was surprised to learn that the League members were still alive. However, they were even more shocked to learn that they had been controlled throughout and given new lives. Toshi, Nito, I offered you both positions at the agency before asking you to join me. I wanted you to know about them so you wouldn't be surprised later. You deserve a chance at a new life as much as anyone. You haven't caused any trouble during your time on the UA campus and have been learning things you need to know to work at the agency. Izuku said, and Toshi and Nito took a few moments to accept it. They were a little tense, but said that would pass once they got used to the idea that they were no longer villains. Later in the semester, Izuku had a run-in with Class 3A, it didn't go well. Izuku's old friends had found him walking down the hall and approached him. They immediately put their foot in it. Uraraka had called him Deku, even though Izuku knew they'd been told not to use that term. Izuku tensed up at that. He also noticed that none of the other Class 3A members corrected her. They were trying to tell him how sorry they were and that they hadn't meant to do what they did. If that wasn't her intention, then why did she call me Deku when everyone's been told not to? Didn't any of you correct her? You all know what that means to me, Izuku said. They quickly fell silent, and Uraraka confirmed that it was her hero name. Are you kidding? That hasn't been my hero name since I left you all in our sophomore year. They changed it to Apollo. How could you not notice that the school has been calling me that during the sports festivals this year and last? And when I captured the league, my hero name was declared to be Apollo too. Izuku spoke, and she became angry. None of them spoke. She just looked at Uraraka and Iida and then walked away. She didn't know if they represented the entire Class 3A, but God didn't want to find out, since none of the other Class 3A students who were there stopped or corrected her. He simply went to Nezu's office and sat on the sofa. Nezu noticed Izuku's bad mood and asked him what was wrong. Izuku simply told him to check a certain hallway and number, and Nezu did. Nezu didn't like what he found. I see, that was disappointing. It seems they haven't changed much, only Bakugo has taken steps to improve and change. That reminds me, he left another letter a little while before you came. That's why he wasn't with the others. Nezu confirmed. Izuku opened the letter, which described how he was doing and how his anger management classes were going. Bakugo explained his plans to start a quirked and quirkless charity to fight discrimination and other problems in society, asking if Izuku would like to help. He clarified that it wouldn't actually start for a few years, as he needed to secure funding for the group. Izuku was surprised. He was amazed by the steps Bakugo was taking. Nezu, who was reading over his shoulder, began to speak. I can confirm that he is doing it. He's been talking to some business professors about plans for the group and has been working on a business plan to see how to set it up and all the things he'll need going forward. Nezu declared, and Izuku had a few tears on his face. He was happy that his old brother had returned. The brother who disappeared a few years after the appearance of his quirk. Izuku wrote back a letter, describing his encounter with Class 3A and expressing his desire to join them. He outlined his plans to open an agency with Toshi and Nito after graduation. He also included a note expressing his hope that his brother would return safely. Nezu received the letter and planned to deliver it to Bakugo later. Nezu was genuinely pleased with Bakugo and confident that he wouldn't fall back into his old ways due to his dedication. One thing about that boy is that when he sets a goal, one day he will achieve it, Nezu thought. Izuku spoke with Class 3B about his interaction with Class 3A, and they were upset. He also talked about his letters with Bakugo, and the class was pleased with his improvement. Overall, it was time to start preparing for the hero exams. They were already at the end of the first semester and needed to start preparing for graduation and the hero exam. Now was the time to give it their all and put everything they had into it. Third POV. It was time. It was time for the hero exam. The students and teachers had been preparing for this day. There was only a month and a half left of the final semester for the third-year students, and they would be trying to obtain their hero licenses in a week. The tension between Class 3B and Class 3A was palpable. Some of the Class 3A students tried to talk to Izuku again, but the Class 3B students intervened, allowing Izuku to escape. He really didn't want to deal with them anymore. Luckily for Izuku, he would be taking the exam with Class 3B at their headquarters, not Class 3A. Therefore, he didn't have to worry about dealing with them during the exam. While everyone worked on team and individual movements, they worked tirelessly. Izuku was also doing a lot of physical training to try and gain final control of One for All before the test. It was 3 days before the exam when he felt it. He had reached 100%, and One for All felt different inside him. He felt like he was no longer filled with overwhelming power. He felt like he was filled with relaxing power. It was nice to let it all flow through his body and not use it. It felt so good to let it sink into his body and stay there. Then, Izuku was pulled into One for All. He came face to face with all the users from the past. Hello, Izuku. Good job reaching 100%. It took you about 3 years, and you've completed One for All's mastery. Now you just need to get used to it and know when to use it and when not to in battle. Although there won't be many situations where you'll need it. That's it, the first user stated. The others told Izuku he had done a good job and other things. Soon, they allowed Izuku to return to the world of the living. Izuku found himself in the nurse's office, and Nezu was there doing the paperwork. I see you're awake. Class 3B was startled when you fell to the ground after activating your quirk. Can you tell me what happened? Nezu asked, worried. Izuku then explained that he had reached 100% and was taken inside the dreamscape of his quirk before being sent back after a communication. I see. This must be the result of you reaching 100%. Although we've never heard of this before perhaps it's because your synchronization with the quirk is better than everyone else's. Nezu said. They quickly gave Izuku the go-ahead, and he went to 3B to make sure he was alright. They asked him what had happened, and Izuku explained that he had controlled his quirk at 100% for the first time and had overdone it. He shouldn't have any problems using 100% of his strength aspect in the future, as they believed it was a one-off, a late bloom. However, Toshi and Nate understood a little better. Izuku had told them both the truth because they were going to start an agency with him, and he trusted them. Therefore, Izuku took a break from training since the exam was only 3 days away, and he didn't want to overdo it. The whole class agreed to relax and unwind, as they also didn't want to overdo it and mess things up right before the exam. Everyone wanted to hang out in dorm 3B and relax. So, they organized a movie marathon. Soon the days passed, and the time for the hero exam arrived. This is how they found themselves in a stadium on the outskirts of a city. They entered the building, were dispersed, and given a written exam with 200 questions. They had 1 hour to complete it. As time passed, Izuku quickly finished the exam and then rested his head, having completed it. An exam staff member walked by, nudged him on the arm, and pointed to the exam. Izuku handed it over and said in a low voice that he was finished. They took it and began grading it. Some other students from UA finished earlier, and the staff collected their exams. Others finished about 15 minutes before the end of the exam, and 15 minutes later the bell rang, and the staff declared it over. If you have not finished all the questions, please stand up and hand your exam to a member of staff. You have finished and you have not passed, said the announcer. Damn, that's really hard, Izuku thought. They were soon told that they would be doing a 10K race on a track that they were monitoring. You may use your quirks, but you are not allowed to interfere with other test takers. If you cause an accident to another person, you fail. Get into position and be ready. The announcement was made. Everyone took their positions and started running once the race began. It didn't matter if you were first or last. What mattered was reaching the finish line before time ran out. The time limit was set at 1 hour. As time passed, Izuku quickly reached the finish line because a race like this was one he was destined to win easily, given his 100% control and his ability to float, which allowed him to fly through the air at high speed. Around the halfway point of the time limit, the rest of the UA students arrived. The time limit expired, and everyone who didn't make it was dismissed. That meant about 150 people were ejected from the stadium. They had started with 500 people and lost 50 in the first section, and now they've just lost another 150. 200 people have fallen already. Now they had to carry out rescue operations. They didn't give us instructions and just told us the city had been attacked by villains and that there were people inside. Begin. It's official, the staff announced. All the UA students sprang into action and got to work. Some others were taken aback by the lack of detail and the way it was introduced, but they got to work about 30 seconds after the UA students. The UA students had grown accustomed to villain attacks since their first year and to doing assignments and studies, so they were used to not having opening words or starting off simply. They were also used to getting to work right away and not wasting any time. The rescue operation was generally easy for the UA students, as it was a repetition of almost everything they had already done at school. They were expecting a villain attack similar to the interim exam. Everyone at UA had formed groups of 2 to 4 people and worked quickly. Izuku, Toshi, and Nito teamed up and worked efficiently. Izuku was the center of power. Toshi used his quirk to calm people down and gather information, and Nito used his quirk to be a shrewd operator and respond to situations as needed. They made a very powerful team. After about 40 minutes of working with the victims and transporting them to the medical tents, there was a huge explosion. The villains had begun attacking the teams in the fields. When Izuku's team went back inside, they found a team from another school under attack and went to support them. Get your civilians out of here, Izuku yelled, and the students tried to argue that they could handle the villains. Izuku got annoyed at that moment and simply increased his power-up rate and knocked out the villains by punching them in the gut. The other team complained that their villains had been stolen. You're a hero to be a hero, not just a fighter. The villains are always your first priority. If that's not your priority, then stop being a hero, Izuku shouted. Then he approached the civilians and began checking them over, asking if they were all right. They said they were fine, and Izuku's team simply escorted them out, leaving the other team behind. The other team was angry. However, Izuku and his team had already left. Soon the round came to an end. Everyone gathered, and the results were announced. Of the 300 people remaining, only 100 had made it through this exam site. The entire Class 3B and Izuku had passed with more points than required. They all scored in the top 5% of test takers. As they headed to the bus, the other team approached them and began shouting. They made us fail the exam, you bastards. They shouted. Izuku saw their scores, recognizing their faces on the scoreboard. He saw they were nowhere near enough points. Izuku turned around and saw a crowd of people watching, some even recording. Izuku knew this was his moment to announce to the world who he was and that he was the heir to All Might. You think the exam cost you? I've seen your scores, and none of you were close enough to the passing grade for that to be true. Even if it were, you allowed your team and the civilians they were guarding to be attacked by the fake villains during the exam. We showed up and told you to get the civilians out of there while we held off the villains so they could get to safety. You refused, so I quickly ended the fight with the villains and then checked on your civilians, since you hadn't taken their presence into account during the fight. Then we escorted them out as we should have. Izuku declared in a firm tone as he stood his ground. The entire Class 3B rallied behind him, having learned from their friends what had happened and discovering that the other teams were full of idiots. Fuck the civilians. The hero's job is to fight the villains. The guy shouted. Izuku looked a little disappointed and then asked the other men on the guy's team if they agreed, and they said yes. Then they don't deserve to be heroes. Being a hero means saving people first. Villains come second. You have to make sure the people you're there to protect are as safe as possible, and then fight the villains or split up your team to keep the villains at bay while you clear bystanders out of the way to fight the villain. Izuku said, standing firm and proud of his words. People were shocked by Izuku, and what no one knew was that Vlad King was broadcasting this on UA's social media pages. He didn't even consult Nezu before doing it. He just did it and was prepared to accept any negative reactions. Oh, what gives you the right to say we are not heroes and that what we believe is wrong? The guy asked. Izuku just laughed. Everyone was confused. What right do I have? Well, let's see. I am Apollo, Principal Nezu's personal student of UA. I am Apollo, the protege of the symbol of peace, All Might. I am the heir to his title of the symbol of peace. I am Apollo, the hero of grace who will shed light on the forgotten of this society. That is what I am because I am here. Izuku screamed with his quirk at 100%, causing his hair to float slightly and turn a faint blue with the light emanating from it. The other students on the team took a few steps back, surprised. Izuku lowered his quirk and turned it off. All Might was a true hero. No, he's still a true hero even now because he inspires people to keep doing good. When people think of a hero, they think of All Might. They don't think of people like Endeavor when they dream of being a hero. Remember, Endeavor is a hero who always focused on fighting rather than saving, and guess what? He could never surpass All Might. He was and always will be All Might's runner-up because people see All Might as a true hero, unlike Endeavor. Me and the students of 3B at UA will surpass people like Endeavor and show what heroes should be like again. People like Endeavor will be forgotten over time, but people like All Might won't be. So I suggest you decide what kind of hero you want to be like. Izuku said as he turned around and got on the bus and sat down with his friends following behind him. They soon arrived back at the school, and there were media outlets outside. They wanted answers about Apollo's declaration as All Might's successor. They wanted to know if it was true. Did they have a new symbol of peace? As the bus entered the bus bay, All Might and Nezu got out. That was an interesting show you put on, Izuku. Nezu said he was confused. Then they showed the video that Vlad King broadcast. I didn't know that was being broadcast. Izuku said, stunned. I'm sorry about that. I felt you were going to say something good and I wanted the world to know. I take any blame, Nezu, but I think this was a good thing for Izuku and Class 3B. Vlad said this, and they agreed. It's time to address the questions. Apollo, please join us. 3B, you're welcome to join if you wish. Nezu spoke, and everyone gathered around. They refused to abandon Izuku. They were soon standing in front of the gates, and Nezu had Cementos build a miniature stage and set up a microphone and speakers. Nezu stepped onto the stage, and everyone stood behind him, still in their hero costumes. Hello everyone, and welcome to UA's sudden press conference. We're here to address the recent flurry of social media posts. I'll confirm that UA did release this. I'll confirm that the student featured in the video is the student with the hero name Apollo, who just passed his hero exam with UA's 3B. He is indeed my personal student and is in class 3N, which is my personal student class. Now, I'll give the floor to All Might," Nezu said as he jumped onto Vlad King's shoulder. All Might stepped up to the microphone. Everyone fell silent when he did. "Hello. It's been a while since I've been at a press conference. We're here to talk about Apollo, who has claimed to be my protege. I'm here to confirm that he is indeed my protege, whom I personally trained before he came to UA and whom I helped train while he was there. Although I'm not the best teacher, other teachers, like Nezu, have taken over a good portion of his training, as they are much better than I am now. However, he remains my personal student, whom I fully support in his hero career. He will even inherit my entire agency in the future when I pass away. However, he has stated that he will leave it as a charitable organization. He has his own plans to start his own agency with several members of his friends from Class 3B, with whom he has become very close. I am very proud of everything he has done so far and what he will continue to do. Now we will take questions." All Might affirmed. Questions soon arose. Some asked about his comparison between All Might and the current number 1. All Might simply stated that he supports his student status. All Might was informed of their plans to eliminate Endeavor, as they had evidence that he had committed numerous crimes. They didn't tell him what the plan entailed, but he trusted Nezu and Izuku, so he didn't question it. Others inquired about why Izuku had been taken on as Nezu's personal student, but their questions were dismissed. Nezu simply stated that there was no one who could challenge him in mental strength. Some asked about his stance on those forgotten by society, as he had mentioned in the video. Izuku knew that at that moment, he would either be destroyed or rebuilt. Izuku stepped forward and began to speak. "Only a few people know this, but I didn't have a quirk before. My quirk didn't activate at age 4 like everyone else. It only activated when I was 14, a few months before UA. Luckily, I was smart and had trained myself physically to my liking, otherwise, I would have destroyed my body. When it started, I could only use a small percentage of my quirk, unlike now when I can use 100% of it, along with its other aspects. What I meant by the forgotten, as those with weak quirks, those with quirks considered villainous by society, or those without quirks at all. These people are abused by our society as if it were a sport, when it isn't," Izuku said. He looked at his friends and teachers. Then Izuku did it. He took off the top part of his suit and unzipped it, revealing his entire upper body. Everyone present paled and stared in astonishment. They might think these scars are from hero training or training in general. They'd be wrong. This is from my growth as a quirkless person and from my quirk not developing in time. The words are etched on my skin. Quirkless freak. However, I believe those who did this to me are the freaks. They were the monsters who decided it was fun and a good game to do it, Izuku said, holding his head high. I refuse to ignore this part of our society. Criminals are created by the actions of our society. Most of today's crimes can be traced back to how people were treated in the past, and it's deplorable that our society allows it. I want to save everyone, even those our society has deemed undesirable. That's why I am Apollo. My goal is to bring healing and knowledge to our society, but I will be dangerous to those who dare to harm others simply because of how they were born. I am Apollo, Izuku said without arguing. Then he took a step back, and everyone remained surprised. All the mites stood up and began to talk before he finished. It's very sad that our society thinks what happened to my protege is acceptable. Nor is it a sudden change. Society grew to this point, and I know it did. The reason I know is that I'm like Apollo. I was quirky myself for a good part of my childhood before my weirdness came into play in my teens. That's another reason why I took him under my wing, as we had similar backgrounds, yet were so different. I was spared because people without quirks were more common when I was young. Society didn't do what they did to him and other weirdos back then. They learned to do it over time. People remember the quirk wars and hate how weirdos were persecuted for being different, but weirdos are simply repeating history and doing to others what was done to them. That doesn't make it right. Our society needs to change. Two great heroes could never be heroes because of our society's views, yet we persevered, and I became the symbol of peace. My protege overcame far more challenges than I did, and he will become an amazing hero. All Might declared in a strong voice at the end. Nezu ended the press conference and everyone went inside. This was the day that Japanese society began to change. People talked about Apollo's past, and then All Might's. How had their society reached this point? As time passed, the public demanded more change, and it increased. A year had passed since that day, and Apollo had broken through, reaching the #1 spot. A few months later, Nezu and Apollo announced an investigation into Endeavor for past abuses and crimes he had covered up because he was a hero. The crimes were investigated, and the former students of Class 3B helped, all of them reaching the top 30. Bakugo himself also reached the top 10 within the first 2 years. The crimes were revealed, and the former students of 3B and Izuku held a press conference with Nezu and called out all the crimes of the Endeavors and the evidence they had obtained. Heroes like Endeavor are unacceptable. My generation will not allow this to go unpunished. Those who commit crimes in the name of being a hero should heed this warning. We are watching. We will come for you, Apollo said as the police dragged Endeavor to a cell. The media was ablaze with the new information and the stance Apollo and his companions were taking since becoming heroes. They were cracking down on villains and heroes alike. The public adored them, and faith in heroes was on the rise. 6 months later there was another press conference, and this one was bigger. Today we gather here with most of the top 30 heroes, along with most of the former Class 3B and myself from Class 3N. We are here to announce, along with Principal Nezu and the other hero schools, that we hereby refuse to recognize the authority of the Hero Commission. Apollo announced. This conference was also broadcast live. The world was watching since Apollo was popular on board as well. The world was confused about what was happening. You may be confused. Let me explain. When I was still at UA with Nezu, we started investigating Endeavor's crimes and also the crimes committed by the Hero Commission. We discovered that they were aware of Endeavor's crimes and helped cover them up. They also committed many other crimes, such as illegally buying children to raise as heroes they controlled. One of those heroes was Hawks, the former #2 hero. They bought him as a child and forced him to train non-stop and have his entire life controlled by the commission. This is immoral and illegal. There are many other cases as well, but they also covered up other crimes committed by the heroes they controlled. They also had knowledge of the League of Villains for quite some time before Nezu and I tracked them down. They knew their location and did nothing about it. They also knew about other threats and allowed them to continue since some of them were in the Commission's pocket. The Commission is accused of conspiring with villains to harm Japan and of covering up these crimes, of criminals like Endeavor. For this reason, UA, the other hero schools, my agency, and many of the top 30 heroes refuse to recognize them as a governing body and will mobilize to arrest them. Apollo declared. The press went wild with the news. Questions were fired left and right. Izuku answered who would present themselves as heroes from now on. At this time, since the governing body cannot be trusted to act in good faith, we are creating our own governing body. This body will consist of various government representatives, UN representatives, representatives elected by the public, and a group of representatives comprised of retired heroes to lead the new organization, which will be supported by hero schools and most of the top 30 heroes. Most operations will remain the same, but we will implement more checks and balances to ensure that this level of corruption does not go undetected for so long. Weeks passed, and the public outcry over the information was enormous. However, the heroes didn't suffer a blow, but the government did. The public rallied behind the Big 22, referring to the former students of Class 3B and Apollo, as they comprised 22 individuals. This group was so transparent in many ways that the public trusted them wholeheartedly. Most of the former Class 3A students made it into the top 50. Bakugo reached number 3, just below Nito, which surprised Nito, who assumed it was simply because he was so close to Apollo and co-leader of the agency. Toshi went underground and had grown the underground division, and the agency operated around the clock. The public loved the news that they had 2 divisions functioning continuously. Todoroki focused primarily on rescue work, as he wanted to spite his father, and only ranked in the top 40, which he was happy with. Some of the older heroes were in the top 30, including 3B and Izuku. Society was generally changing every month, with new laws being passed and 200-year-old laws being updated to include traitless people in anti-discrimination legislation. Izuku was happy, And UN reports on traitless people were beginning to show positive impacts after Izuku's 5th year of school. This was the story of Apollo and how he lost friends and made new ones who stood by him and helped him change society for the better. The end. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and make sure to like and please hype this video. Now we will see you in the next video.